Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Truck Stop Pursuit, Unseen Threats Unfolding. I parked my car in the far corner of a truck stop lot just as the sun was setting. The sky burned in shades of orange and purple, fading slowly into a deepening navy. I sat behind the wheel for a few moments, listening to the hum of the highway fading into the background and the distant clatter of semi-trucks unloading freight. The air smelled faintly of diesel and fried food, a scent that clung to these outposts of the interstate no matter where you were in the country. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the quiet wrap around me before I finally stepped out into the cool evening. The truck stop was a sprawling complex of neon signs and flickering fluorescent lights. A convenience store stood on one side, its sliding doors welcoming weary travelers with the promise of stale coffee and lukewarm sandwiches. On the other, a greasy spoon diner hummed with conversation and the clink of dishes. I could hear the murmur of voices inside, punctuated by the occasional laugh or the sharp ring of an order bell. I was halfway tempted to grab something hot to eat, but first I needed to clear my head. I walked toward the edge of the parking lot, where a cracked bench sat beneath a rusting lamppost. The light flickered erratically as a gentle breeze kicked up dust and bits of paper. I sank down onto the bench and pulled out my phone, the screen bright in the encroaching darkness. The battery was low, and the signal weaker than I'd hoped. I scrolled through messages, a couple from Mom, one from Sarah that I hadn't opened yet, and a string of missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I debated whether to answer it. The night stretched ahead of me, uncertain and quiet, but something about that missed call nagged at me. I tapped the screen and held the phone to my ear. The call connected on the second ring. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. Then a low voice, cautious but urgent. "Is this Mark? I don't have much time. You don't know me, but I think you're in danger." I frowned, glancing around the empty lot. "Who is this?" "What do you mean, danger?" "I'm sorry to be cryptic, but it's safer this way. You need to leave the truck stop. Don't get back in your car. Someone's been following you since you left town." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I'd noticed a few trucks parked too close for comfort, and a man who had seemed to linger near the store entrance longer than usual. Paranoia, maybe, but what if this caller was right? How do I know this isn't a prank? I asked. "You don't," the voice admitted. "But trust me. There's a diner a few miles down the road, open late. Go there. I'll try to reach you again." Before I could say anything else, the call ended. The line went dead. I pocketed the phone and looked back toward the diner. The neon sign buzzed, casting red light on the asphalt. I hesitated, then started toward my car, unlocking the door and tossing my bag onto the passenger seat. My hands trembled slightly as I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The road ahead was dark except for the headlights cutting through the night. The diner's sign grew larger in the distance, a beacon of warmth. I parked near the entrance and stayed inside the car for a moment, watching the door, waiting for any sign of trouble. Finally, I stepped out and pushed open the diner door. The air inside was thick with the scent of coffee and bacon. A few patrons sat scattered at the counter and booths, mostly regulars nursing late-night meals. I slid onto a stool at the counter, catching the waitress's eye. "Coffee, black, and maybe something to eat. If it's not too much trouble," I added, rubbing my hands together. She nodded with a tired smile and turned to the kitchen, her footsteps light against the linoleum floor. The jukebox hummed softly in the corner, playing an old country tune that blended seamlessly with the low murmur of conversations. I glanced around, my eyes briefly scanning the faces. None of them looked like trouble, but after the night I had, I wasn't about to let my guard down. The waitress returned, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, followed by a plate of eggs and toast. I thanked her quietly and took a slow sip, the bitter warmth settling into my chest. As I ate, I noticed a man sitting at the far end of the counter, hunched over a newspaper. His coat was worn but clean, and his eyes flicked up toward me now and then, curious but cautious. I caught his gaze and gave a slight nod, an unspoken acknowledgement. It was the kind of silent communication born from shared understanding, people who had seen too much and trusted too little. I took another bite, then leaned back slightly, allowing myself a moment to breathe. Outside, rain began to patter against the diner's windows, the steady rhythm a backdrop to the quiet tension inside. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, knowing that when I finally left this place, the real work would begin. Tonight wasn't about comfort, it was the last page before the storm. The waitress refilled my coffee without a word, her eyes flickering briefly toward the door. Somewhere deep down, I knew time was slipping away faster than I wanted. I didn't sleep much that night. I thanked him and headed inside. The waitress was wiping down tables, her movements slow and careful. She didn't look up. The payphone box was old, the receiver hanging crooked. I picked it up and listened. No dial tone. I tried dialing my own number, then 911, then the only local police station I knew. Nothing. Dead silence except for the faint hum of the fluorescent light overhead. I put the receiver back and leaned against the wall, trying to think. There had to be a way out. I pulled out the crumpled map I'd found in my glove box earlier. It showed the area around the truck stop, but the roads didn't match what I saw outside. Streets looped back on themselves, and some roads just ended abruptly in what looked. I studied the map, tracing routes with my finger, then looked out the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was overcast, dull and gray. The diner was empty now except for the man and the waitress. I wondered if they were part of this strange setup. I asked the man, "Do you know if anyone else stays here? Travelers, drivers?" He shrugged. "Sometimes, but not many. This place isn't on most routes anymore. Doesn't seem like a place people just pass through." He gave a slight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Depends on what you're looking for." I nodded and moved toward the door. "Thanks." Outside again, I noticed the lights along the edge of the parking lot flickering. The trees that lined the road seemed even thicker. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. I started walking along the pavement, trying to get my bearings. Every turn I took seemed to loop me back toward the truck stop. I checked the map again, convinced I was missing something, but the road spun around. I stopped at the edge of the lot where a faded sign pointed to the highway. The item didn't make sense. It pointed east, but the highway should have been west. I decided to walk in the direction the sign indicated, hoping to find a real road or at least a landmark I recognized. The trees grew closer, their branches scraping against the side of my jacket. The air was thick with damp earth and something else, something faint but unpleasant. After 20 minutes, the pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt. I kept going, the path narrowing until I had branches brushing against my arms on both sides. Suddenly, I heard a voice. Low and calm, barely above a whisper. "Lost?" I froze. The voice came from just behind a large oak tree. I stepped forward cautiously. The man who stepped into view was middle-aged, his clothes worn but clean, just. His eyes were sharp, and he smiled without friendliness. "You shouldn't be wandering out here alone," he said. "Not safe." I swallowed hard. I'm trying to find the highway. He shook his head. Doesn't leave where you think it does. I took a step back, hands raised slightly. Look, I just want to get out of here. My phone's gone, and nothing makes sense. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're not the first one. But people don't just walk away from this place. Why would someone do this? Trap people? I asked. His smile faded. It's complicated. Some come here looking for something else. Some just get lost. I glanced back toward the truck stop. The lights flickered again, and the rain started up once more. Can you help me? I asked. He looked down the path, then back at me. Maybe. But it'll cost you. I blinked. Cost me? What do you mean? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. Information. You give me something I want, I give you a way out. I hesitated. The idea of bargaining with a stranger in this place didn't sit right, but I didn't see another option. What kind of information? Something only you know. Something valuable. I thought about my truck, my belongings, the phone gone from the glove box. What could I offer that mattered? Before I could answer, the man stepped back into the shadows. Think about it. I'll be around. I was left standing alone on the path, rain starting to soak through my jacket. The maze was growing tighter, and the cost of getting out was already becoming clear. The cold drizzle blurred my vision as I zipped my jacket higher, trying to shake off the creeping unease. Every rustle of leaves sounded louder now, every distant snap of a twig like a warning. I pulled my phone from my pocket, half expecting it to be dead, but the screen flickered weakly enough to remind me I wasn't completely cut off. Still, no signal bars. Just static silence. I debated whether to call for help or try to retrace my steps, but the maze wasn't just physical, it felt like it was designed to disorient, to fragment your sense of direction until you forgot what mattered. The man's words echoed in my mind, something only you know. Something valuable. What did I have that could count? The answer eluded me, buried beneath layers of fear and distrust. A sudden movement caught my eye, a flicker between the trees. I froze, heart pounding. Was he watching me again? Or was this another player in the game? No one had appeared since that moment, but the feeling of being hunted didn't fade. I took a cautious step forward, the ground soft beneath my boots. The path forked ahead, two routes disappearing into darkness. Neither looked safe. I closed my eyes for a moment, drawing in a shaky breath. If I chose wrong, I might never leave this place. But standing still wasn't an option either. The rain picked up, drumming relentlessly on the canopy above, as if urging me to decide. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that whatever I revealed next wouldn't just be currency, it might be the key to survival. I stayed at the fork longer than I should have, listening to the rain tap against the leaves. Who are you? I asked, standing slowly. Name's Mike. I've been trapped here for a couple of days. I'm trying to find a way out, just. I didn't know whether to trust him, but I needed someone. How did you get here? Same as you. Parked at the truck stop overnight. He glanced around nervously. It's a trap. They mess with the signs, the roads, even the landmarks. It's meant to break you down. I nodded. Someone took my phone. Yeah, they take things that connect you to the outside world. Keeps you isolated. We sat and talked quietly. Mike said he tried every road, every trail, but always ended up back where he started. They want you tired, confused, scared, he said. If you give up, they win. I told him about the man who spoke to me, the words about something valuable only I knew. Mike looked thoughtful. Could be it came to them. A way to make you reveal something. Maybe they want to use it against you. I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't even know I had worth using. The rain slowed, and the sky lightened a bit. We agreed to stick together for now. 2 people might have a better chance of figuring this out. Before we left, I checked the map again. There was a small symbol in the corner I hadn't noticed before, a circle with a dot in the middle. Mike said it looked like a meeting point or a control center. If we can find that, maybe we can find out who's behind this, he said. I felt a flicker of hope, but it was mixed with unease. Whoever ran this place was organized, patient, and careful. They didn't want us to leave. We started down the right path this time, moving cautiously. The trees seemed to close in tighter, and the ground felt slippery. Every step echoed louder than it should have. Suddenly, Mike stopped. He raised a finger to his lips and pointed ahead. I saw a figure standing near a bend in the trail, half hidden by shadow. The figure didn't move but watched us. I felt my pulse quicken. Mike whispered, "Now alone." As we edged closer, the figure stepped forward, revealing a woman holding a small flashlight. She smiled, but there was something cold in her eyes. "Welcome to the maze," she said. "I'm here to help you. Or at least, to watch." Mike and I exchanged a glance. This wasn't going to be easy. The woman motioned for us to follow her. "There's a place where you can rest. But time's running out." I realized then there was no turning back. Whatever this place was, it had a plan, and we were part of it. I took a deep breath and followed the woman into the darkness, the rain fading behind us. The corridor twisted sharply to the left, then right, the walls closing in like the ribs of some ancient beast. The air grew colder, damp, and heavy with a faint metallic scent. My footsteps echoed unnervingly against the stone floor, and Mike's quiet breathing was the only other sound besides our guide's steady, deliberate pace. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a large chamber illuminated by flickering torches wedged into iron sconces. The light cast long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, making the space feel alive in a sinister way. At the center, a cluster of worn wooden benches surrounded a low stone fountain, dry and cracked. The woman gestured toward the benches. "Sit. Rest while you can," she said, voice low but unmistakably firm. "After that, the game truly begins." I sank onto one of the benches, muscles stiff and senses heightened. Mike dropped beside me, eyes scanning the room as if expecting a trap to spring from the darkness. Our guide remained standing near the entrance, her silhouette sharp against the dim torchlight. "Why are you helping us?" I finally asked, unable to mask the suspicion in my voice. Or watching, for that matter. Her smile was faint again, colder this time. "Help is relative," she said. "And watching is necessary. This place doesn't tolerate weakness or deceit. It demands clarity, truths laid bare or crushed beneath the weight of lies." "What truths?" Mike asked, narrowing his eyes. She tilted her head slightly, studying us both as though measuring our potential usefulness or expendability. "The maze is more than walls and traps," she explained slowly. "It's a reflection of fears, regrets, choices you thought buried deep. It pulls them out, challenges you to face them. Succeed, and you move closer to freedom. Fail, well, you risk becoming part of its design." I swallowed hard. It sounded like some twisted psychological trial, but the urgency in her voice made it impossible to dismiss. The clock was ticking. "What kind of choices?" I pressed, needing more than vague riddles. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Every corner holds a mirror. Not one you look into, but one that looks into you. You'll encounter phantoms, fragments of your past, echoes of what you fear or regret most. Some will beg for your mercy, others will demand your courage. How you respond shapes which path opens before you. Mike frowned. Sounds like a nightmare. It is, she agreed. But nightmares can teach or trap you. That's why I'm here, to watch, to nudge you when necessary. But I won't interfere beyond that. The maze tests what lies within. I exhaled, feeling the weight of her words settle. The challenge was no longer just physical endurance but something far more profound, confronting ourselves. The thought was terrifying. A sudden clatter broke the silence as the heavy wooden door slammed shut behind us. The woman's eyes gleamed in the torchlight. Time's up. The first trial begins now. Before we could react, the wall across from us began to shift, sliding open to reveal a narrow passage bathed in cold blue light. From its depths came a whispering chorus, unintelligible, yet laced with undeniable menace. Mike rose, fists clenched. Ready or not, let's move. I nodded, forcing my legs to obey. Together, we stepped into the unknown, each heartbeat pounding in rhythm with the maze's own dark pulse. The path ahead was uncertain, but retreat was no longer an option. As we plunged forward, the whispers grew louder, folding around us like a living shroud. Faces flickered in the shadows, some pleading, some mocking, each a fragment of memory clawing at the edges of my mind. I clenched. We stepped into the corridor, the cold blue light washing over us. I nodded, trying to push down the rising panic. We'd lost my phone, and with it, any hope of calling for help. The truck stop outside was gone, replaced by this shifting labyrinth and the walls. At the end of the passage, the blue light faded into darkness. The whispers stopped abruptly. We paused, listening, but all was silent except for our breathing. Mike reached out and pushed open another sliding door. Beyond it was a small room, stark except for a single chair in the middle. On the chair sat a folded piece of paper. I crossed the room and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, almost clinical. Welcome. You've passed the first test. But this is only the beginning. Keep moving. Keep looking. Failure to comply will have consequences. Mike's eyes narrowed. Consequences? Like what? I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. I don't know, but I'd rather not find out. We moved back into the corridor. The wall shifted again, and the passage split into two. A sign hung above each door, but the words were scrambled, impossible to read. Great, Mike muttered. Now it's a guessing game. I looked at both doors. The left one had a faint hum behind it. The right was eerily silent. Which way? I asked. Mike shrugged. We pick one. If it's wrong, we try the other. Before I could respond, a voice echoed down the corridor. It was calm, almost amused. Choose wisely. Neither of us moved. The voice came again, closer this time. Time is a luxury you don't have. Mike grabbed my arm. Let's go left. We pushed through the door into a room filled with rows of old, flickering monitors. Each screen showed scenes from earlier parts of the maze, some of us walking. Some of empty corridors and some with figures lurking just out of sight. Surveillance, I said, scanning the screens. They've been watching us. Mike's jaw tightened. What do they want with us? The voice returned, this time behind us. To see how far you'll go. We spun around, but the room was empty. The door slid shut with a hiss. The monitors flickered and went black, leaving us in the dark. Mike tried the door handle. Locked. We're trapped, I said, swallowing hard. A new screen flickered on, showing a live feed of us in the room. Your next test begins when you solve the puzzle. Below the screen was a keypad and a note taped beside it. Enter the 4-digit code that unlocks your path forward. I scanned the room for clues. The monitors, the chair, the note, they all seemed part of the setup. I crouched near the chair and noticed a small engraving on its leg, numbers scratched faintly, 4, 7, 1, 3. Try this, I said, standing and pressing the digits into the keypad. The screen blinked green. The door slid open with a mechanical sigh. Mike exhaled sharply. Looks. We stepped through and found ourselves in a long hallway lined with mirrors. Our reflections stared back, but something was wrong. Each reflection lagged behind our movements by a fraction of a second. I stopped and waved my hand. The reflection hesitated, then mirrored the motion slowly. This is messing with my head, I said. Mike nodded. They want us off balance, confused. As we moved forward, the hallway seemed to stretch, the end receding just out of reach. The mirrors multiplied, creating false paths and dead ends. I tried to keep track, but the reflections made it impossible. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind us. We stopped. Mike turned, but no one was there. Did you hear that? I whispered. He nodded. Yeah. They're close. We quickened our pace, but the footsteps matched ours, never gaining, never falling behind. Panic crept in. My hands trembled, and I had to force myself to keep moving. At the hallway's end, a door appeared. We rushed through, only to find ourselves back in the original room with the chair and monitors. The same note was on the chair. Mike slumped against the wall. We're going in circles. I sank into the chair, trying to steady my breathing. They want us to break. To give up. The voice returned, calm and cold. Persistence is commendable. But even the strongest crack. Mike looked at me, eyes dark. What do you think happens if we don't play their game? I swallowed hard. I don't want to find out. Suddenly, the door behind us opened again. A figure stepped in, a man in a faded uniform, face unreadable. Welcome back, he said. It's time for the final part of your test. Mike and I exchanged a glance. This wasn't just a maze anymore. It was a trap run by someone who wanted to control us, to break us down piece by piece. The man smiled thinly. Shall we begin? I felt every muscle tighten. There was no way out but forward. Whatever this test was, it was far from over. The man gestured toward a narrow corridor dimly lit by flickering bulbs. Follow me, he instructed, voice low but firm. Mike hesitated, eyes flicking to mine, searching for reassurance. I swallowed hard, forcing confidence into my tone. Let's see what they've got. As we stepped into the shadows, the door slammed shut behind us, the sound echoing like a sentence. The air grew colder, heavier, and the weight of what was coming pressed down on us both. The corridor stretched ahead, the flickering bulbs casting uneven shadows on the cracked walls. Mike's jaw tightened. What's the point of this? Why trap people here? What do you want from us? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Control. Compliance. We offer safety in exchange for obedience. You saw how easily one can lose themselves out there. He gestured vaguely to the screens. This maze is a test. Not just of navigation, but of mind and spirit. I swallowed hard. It was clear now, this wasn't about some random kidnapping or accident. This was planned, systematic. A psychological cage for those who wandered too far, alone. Mike stepped forward. We're not part of your game. Let us go. The man's smile faded. You misunderstand. There is no outside. Not until you pass the test. And most don't. I felt a cold wave roll through me. What happens if we don't pass? He shrugged. You stay. Indefinitely. Until you break or disappear. That was the moment I realized how deep this went. This wasn't just a maze. It was a trap designed to erase you, piece by piece. Mike's fists clenched. We'll find a way out. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. We have to. The man turned to a nearby console and pressed a button. A panel slid open, revealing two small devices, simple radios. He handed one to each of us. You'll need these. Use them to communicate, but remember, your voices are monitored. Any attempt to disrupt the system will end the test prematurely. We exchanged a look. It was a faint hope, but hope nonetheless. Follow me, the man said, leading us back to the corridor. Your final challenge begins now. We walked in silence, the weight of those words heavy between us. The maze awaited. Hours passed as we navigated the twisting passages, the radios crackling with static and occasional messages from the man. He gave us puzzles, riddles tied to landmarks we'd seen before. Each challenge was designed to make us question our memory, our perception. The landmarks shifted subtly, signs reversed, murals painted over. It was maddening. Mike kept his focus sharp, but I could see the strain behind his eyes. I felt it too. The maze wasn't just physical, it was wearing us down mentally. We argued once over which direction to take, tension flaring before we pulled back together. We needed each other. At one point, we came upon an old diner, the same one we passed the first night. But the menu was different, the staff absent. The place felt. I checked the counter and found a note tucked beneath a cracked menu card. It read, "Trust your instincts. The exit lies where the shadows meet the light." Mike and I looked at each other. It was vague, but the first real clue that wasn't a trick. We followed the maze's winding paths until we reached a courtyard. The setting sun filtered through broken skylights, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked pavement. It was quiet, too quiet. Suddenly, a voice came over the radio. "You're close. Remember, the test is about control. Take it back." Mike tightened his grip on the radio. Control. How do we take it back? I scanned the courtyard. There was an old truck, rusted but intact. The driver's door was open, keys in the ignition. A chance. We drive. We don't wait for permission, I said. Mike nodded. Let's do it. We climbed in. The engine sputtered but caught. As we pulled out of the courtyard, the maze around us began to shift. Walls slid, corridors lengthened and shortened. The maze was reacting, trying to trap us again. But this time, we controlled the movement. The truck's wheels crushed debris that had blocked our path before. We weren't just wandering, we were pushing through. Minutes felt. At one point, the radio went silent. Then, a new voice crackled in, a woman's. "You're breaking the pattern," she said. "That's not allowed." I pressed the button. "Who are you? What is this place?" Her voice was cold. "A place for those who lose their way, but also for those who find it." "We want out," Mike said firmly. There was a pause. Then, prove it. Before we could respond, the truck surged forward, breaking through a final set of barriers. The walls behind us crumbled. We found ourselves on a gravel road, the night sky open above us. The truck stop was just ahead, lights flickering. We stopped. For a long moment, neither of us moved. "I think it's over," I said quietly. Mike exhaled sharply. "I don't know if I believe that yet." I nodded. The maze had tested us, but it had also changed us. We'd been stripped down and pushed to our limits, forced to rely on each other and our own will. We stepped out of the truck and walked toward the truck stop. The familiar hum of distant traffic and the smell of diesel felt. Inside, a clerk looked up, eyes wary but not hostile. I asked for a phone. No signal. The man in the faded uniform was gone. The maze, it seemed, had released us. The next day, authorities arrived after a passing trucker reported strange activity. Mike and I gave our statements. The maze was investigated, but no one could find evidence of anything beyond an abandoned truck stop and some cracked pavement. I never found my phone. I never got my pictures back. But I had something more, a reminder of how fragile our sense of reality could be, and how much it takes to survive when everything familiar turns against you. Mike and I didn't speak much after that. We had shared something no one else could understand. We parted ways quietly, carrying the weight of the maze with us. Life slowly returned to normal, but every time I passed a truck stop or saw a dimly lit corridor, I remembered. The maze was still out there, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way. And now, I knew how to fight back. Story 2, Living Room Labyrinth, Trapped in a Shifting House. I arrived at the Airbnb just before sunset. I stared at it, the words slowly fading as the mirror cleared. I didn't understand. I was alone here. No one else had been in the house. I checked the locks again, all were secure. I went back to the living room and noticed something new. The wooden box was gone from the kitchen counter, but now it sat on the living room table, open to another photo. This one was different. It was a picture of the living room, but the sofa was missing. Instead, there was a dark stain on the carpet, something that hadn't been there before. I looked down at the floor. The stain wasn't there anymore, but the carpet felt oddly damp. I knelt and touched it. It was cool and slightly sticky. I backed away and ran my hands through my hair. This wasn't normal. Something was happening in this house, something I couldn't explain. I tried calling the host again, but no answer. The silence in the house pressed down on me. I felt like I was being watched, but there was no one. The rooms felt smaller, the walls closer. I spent the rest of the day checking every corner. Nothing else appeared out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was changing around me. I decided to stay awake as long as I could that night, but exhaustion won out. I fell asleep just after midnight. The next morning, I woke to find the staircase had disappeared. Where it once stood, there was now a wall, plain, unbroken, and solid. I stared at it, disbelief freezing me in place. I tried the other doors. The bedrooms were there, but their locations had shifted. The rooms no longer connected the way they had before. The house was rearranging itself, and I was trapped inside. I sat down heavily on the sofa, the weight of it all sinking in. The photos, the messages, the missing staircase, it was like the house was alive, and it was playing a game I didn't understand. I needed to figure out what was going on, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. The silence that followed was oppressive, thickening the air around me until every breath felt like swallowing lead. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. I tried to steady my racing heart, focusing on the faint creaks and groans that had become the house's strange language. Somewhere beyond the walls, I thought I heard a soft whisper, like the rustle of a paper or the sigh of a long-forgotten secret slipping through the cracks. I stood up, my hands trembling as I wiped sweat from my forehead. The shifting layout meant I couldn't trust any direction, but the living room felt like the center, the heart from which everything else pulsed. I moved cautiously toward the fireplace, where an old mantel clock ticked erratically. The hands spun backward, then forward, then stopped altogether. Time itself seemed broken here. Curiosity battled with fear as I reached up to touch the clock. The instant my fingers brushed the face, the room lurched. Walls stretched and contracted, the ceiling dipping low before snapping back up like a breath released. I stumbled, clutching the mantel, but the sensation wasn't painful. It was as if the house was breathing with me, sinking to some internal rhythm. A sudden creak behind me made me whip around. The shadows near the staircase were darker now, more solid. I could make out a figure, too vague to be certain, but definitely there. A woman, maybe, standing just beyond the reach of light. Her outline shimmered like a mirage, and as I blinked, she vanished. Only a cold breeze remained, brushing past me like a ghost's whisper. I swallowed hard. The house wasn't just rearranging rooms, it was revealing memories, or perhaps its own story. The photos I'd seen earlier weren't just family snapshots, they were clues, fragments of a life lived and lost within these walls. Had the house absorbed the people who once called it home? Was it trying to tell me their story, or warn me away? I moved toward the hallway again, choosing a door that hadn't been there before. The wood was ancient, splintered at the edges, and the brass handle was cold to the touch. Inside, the room was a study, lined with shelves of dusty books and papers scattered across a large oak desk. Among the clutter, a leather-bound journal lay open, its pages yellowed but preserved. I picked it up carefully. The handwriting was elegant, looping letters that seemed to dance across the page. The entries detailed the daily life of a woman named Eliza, who had once lived here. Her accounts were filled with mundane details, weather, meals, visits from neighbors, but darker notes crept in as I read further. Mentions of strange noises, shadows moving on their own, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. One passage caught my eye. The house whispers at night. It knows our secrets, our fears. I fear it is alive, and it grows restless with each passing day. If you find this journal, beware the rooms that shift and the stairs that vanish. The house is not what it seems. A shiver ran down my spine. Eliza's words mirrored my own experiences. This wasn't just a house, it was a living entity, haunted by the memories and emotions of those who had dwelled within it. But why? And what did it want from me? A sudden sound snapped me back, a soft thud from somewhere upstairs. The staircase, the one that had disappeared moments ago, was now visible again, though it looked fragile, like it might crumble if I stepped on it. I debated whether to climb, but something urged me forward. Answers were up there, I felt it in my bones. I ascended slowly, each creak of the stairs echoing like a warning. At the top, the hallway stretched endlessly, lined. The hallway stretched on, dim and silent except for the faint creaks under my feet. That last line hit me hard. A hidden door beneath the floor? That could explain some of the strange noises I heard. I flipped through the pages, searching for more clues. Day 42. I must see what lies beneath the floor. The house is restless tonight, almost angry. I feel like it's watching me, waiting for me to cross a line. I'm afraid I already have. If this journal is found, please be careful. The house is not just a structure, it's something else. Something alive. The handwriting stopped there, and I felt a chill creep up my neck. This was Eliza's journal. The same woman whose warnings echoed in my mind. I knew I had to find that hidden door. But first, I needed to understand the layout of this ever-changing house better. I closed the notebook and looked around the room. Among the papers was a rough sketch of the floor plan. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but with closer inspection I realized the rooms were rearranged in the drawing. Some doors led to places that didn't exist in the current layout. One corner marked Hidden Chamber caught my eye. I carefully folded the sketch and tucked it into my pocket. I'd need this. As I turned to leave, a soft whisper brushed past my ear. It was barely audible, but the words were clear. Don't dig too deep. I froze, the air thickening around me. The voice was faint, like a breeze through cracked windows, but it was real. No one else was in the house. I told myself it was my imagination, but the warning lingered. Back in the hallway, I tested each door. Some opened into rooms I recognized, others revealed unfamiliar spaces. One, near the end of the corridor, was locked tight. I rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock looked old but solid. Curiosity pushed me on. I moved to the far end of the hall where the floor creaked oddly underfoot. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the baseboard, feeling for any irregularities. My fingers caught on a small latch, cleverly hidden beneath a layer of dust and paint. My heart raced as I pulled it. A section of the floor lifted slowly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose was cold and smelled damp, like a cellar or a forgotten basement. I grabbed my phone and switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness. The stairs were steep and narrow. I hesitated, the warning still echoing in my mind, but the urge to uncover the truth was stronger. I started down carefully, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. At the bottom, I found myself in a small room lined with old furniture covered in sheets and a thick layer of dust. On the far wall was a large mirror, cracked in one corner but otherwise intact. Approaching the mirror, I noticed something carved faintly into its frame, words almost erased by time. I squinted and made out the phrase, "What you see is not always real." I touched the glass, and for a moment my reflection flickered oddly. Then it shifted, showing not just me but the room behind me filled with shadowy shapes I couldn't identify. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The mirror's surface rippled like water, then settled back to normal. My breath caught. Was this a trick of the light, or was the owl showing me something? I stepped back, and the floor creaked again, louder this time. The air grew heavier, and I felt a pressure in my chest. I decided to leave the hidden chamber for now. On my way back up the stairs, I heard faint footsteps above me, slow and deliberate. I paused, holding my breath, but no one appeared. When I reached the top, the hallway was empty. The fragile staircase behind me seemed more solid now. I went back downstairs and locked the hidden door behind me, but the questions hung heavier than ever. What was beneath the mirror? Was the house really alive? And if so, why had it chosen me? The next morning, I woke up with the sketch still in my pocket and the journal's warnings fresh in my mind. I checked the rooms again, but the layout had shifted once more. The locked door was gone, replaced by a wall. The hidden staircase was sealed off. It was clear the house didn't want me digging too deep. But I wasn't about to give up. I sat down at the kitchen table and spread the papers out. The journal, the sketch, the photographs. Then I noticed a new detail in one of the pictures, a faded image of a man standing in the same hallway where I'd found the hidden door. But behind him was a symbol carved into the wall, something I hadn't seen before. I traced the symbol with my finger. It looked like a spiral, but with sharp angles, almost. I grabbed my phone and searched for anything similar, but nothing came up. It was unique, or at least rare enough to be unknown. I glanced back at the hallway outside the window. The room shifted again, silently and without warning. The house was changing while I watched. I didn't know what the symbol meant, but I had a sinking feeling it was a key, maybe to unlocking the house's secrets or to something far worse. That night, I made a decision. I would stay awake and watch the house move. I needed to understand the pattern, or at least catch it in the act. As darkness fell, I sat in the living room, the journal and sketch on my lap, eyes fixed on the walls. Minutes passed, then hours. Then, just past midnight, the house began to shift again. The floorboards groaned, the walls seemed to breathe, and the furniture slid silently across the rooms. The house rearranged itself. And then, the lights flickered, and I heard it, a whisper, clearer this time. "Find the spiral." I shivered and looked toward the hallway, or the walls. I knew the house wasn't done with me yet. The whisper came again, low but clear, "Find the spiral." I kept my eyes on the hallway where the walls had started to shift once more. My hands shook as I read it. I glanced around the kitchen, then down at the floor. The tiles were old, cracked in places. I knelt and ran my fingers over the grout, looking for anything unusual. Near the corner, where the kitchen met the living room, one tile seemed different. It was colder, and the edges didn't match perfectly. I pressed down, and the tile shifted slightly under my fingertip. I pulled at it, and with a faint pop, the tile came loose. Beneath it was a small door built into the floor, about the size of a briefcase. A cold draft rose from the opening, carrying a faint musty smell. I hesitated, then grabbed the flashlight from my bag and shined it into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I took a deep breath and started down the steps. The air grew colder as I went deeper, and the silence was heavy. At the bottom, the flashlight caught on a rough stone wall covered in faded symbols. The spiral was carved into the center, surrounded by strange markings that looked like letters but made no sense to me. I ran my fingers over the carving and felt a faint vibration. Then the flashlight flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, finally turning on the screen light. The narrow space felt tighter, the walls pressing in. I took a few cautious steps forward and saw a small wooden chest against the far wall. I opened it carefully. Inside were several old photographs, yellowed and curled. They showed people I didn't recognize, standing in front of the house, but the house looked different in each picture. Sometimes it was smaller, sometimes larger. In one, it had an extra wing with tall windows I hadn't noticed. One photo caught my eye. It was of a woman holding a child, both staring directly at the camera. Behind them, the spiral symbol was painted on the wall. I felt a strange connection to the woman, as if I'd seen her somewhere before, but I couldn't place it. I put the photos down and heard a faint sound from upstairs, a soft creaking, like footsteps moving across wooden floors. I froze. I was alone in the house, or so I thought. I climbed the stairs quickly, the feeling of being watched growing stronger. When I reached the kitchen, everything was back to normal. The tile I had removed was firmly in place, and the wooden box was gone. I checked the rest of the house. Every door, every window was locked tight. No sign anyone else was here. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind racing. The house was playing tricks on me, leading me deeper into its secrets. The spiral was a clue, but to what? Why was it hidden beneath the floorboards? I looked at the journal again, flipping through the pages. The entries had become more frantic over time, filled with references to the spiral and warnings not to follow it. The last page was torn, but I could make out one sentence: "Once the spiral is found, there is no going back." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just a house that rearranged itself. It was a trap, and I had stepped right into the middle of it. I stood up, determined to find out more. I had to know what the spiral meant and why the house was so obsessed with it. But as I moved toward the hallway, the lights flickered again, and the walls began to pulse softly. The house was waking up, and it wasn't ready to let me leave. The pulse grew stronger, syncing with the quickening beat of my heart. The air thickened, becoming almost viscous, as if the house itself was breathing, alive and aware. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, coalescing into vague shapes that seemed to whisper just beyond the edge of hearing. I reached out, fingers grazing the wallpaper, which now felt like coarse bark rather than smooth plaster. The spiral pattern beneath my touch shimmered, subtly moving, as if guiding me deeper into the labyrinth. I hesitated, then followed the pull, stepping into the hallway that had shifted again. The familiar layout had dissolved, replaced by corridors I hadn't seen before, endless, narrowing, folding back on themselves. Doors appeared and vanished in the flickering light, some ajar, others sealed tight with old, rusted locks that clicked hypnotically. Each door seemed to promise answers or doom in equal measure. The whispers grew louder, forming an indecipherable chant that echoed off the walls, weaving through the air like silk threads. My skin prickled with unease, but something inside me urged forward. I had to face whatever this spiral represented. Approaching a door carved with the same swirling motif, I pressed my palm against it. The surface rippled like water beneath my touch, and with a slow creak, it swung open. Inside was a room I hadn't seen before, dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb that cast long, trembling shadows. The walls were plastered with sketches and notes, all centered around the spiral, diagrams, cryptic symbols, hurried scribbles in a language I couldn't read. In the center stood a pedestal, and atop it lay an old, leather-bound journal. I picked it up, the weight familiar yet ominous. Opening to the first page, the handwriting was jagged, frantic. Herein lies the truth of the spiral, a loop of memory and time, binding those who find it to this place forever. The house is not evil, but a guardian preserving what must never be forgotten. To break free, one must unravel the spiral from within, confronting the past, the present, and the future entwined. A chill ran down my spine. The spiral wasn't just a pattern, it was a curse, a puzzle linking lives and moments in an eternal cycle. And now, I was part of it. I closed the journal carefully and sat down on the cold floor, trying to steady my breathing. I closed the book and looked around the room again, suddenly aware of how much I had missed. The walls were lined with drawings that seemed to repeat the spiral pattern, but some included strange symbols I didn't recognize. I ran my fingers over one of the diagrams, tracing the loop. The idea of being trapped in a loop of time and memory was terrifying, but the feeling that I was connected to this place in some way was even worse. I stood up and moved toward the door, but then stopped. If the house rearranged itself every night, then maybe the door would lead somewhere different tomorrow, or even in the next moment. I had to test it. I had to confront this, not just hide from it. I stepped back into the hallway. The air felt heavier here. I could hear the soft creak of wood settling, but it was different this time, more deliberate. Like the house was waiting for me to make a move. I decided to try something that felt risky. I closed my eyes and turned in a circle, then opened them and walked toward where the staircase had been when I first arrived. It wasn't there. Instead, a narrow corridor stretched out before me, lined with old photographs in black frames. I recognized some of the faces, people I'd seen in the sketches, the same ones in the journal. Their eyes. I reached out and touched one of the frames. The glass was gold. Behind it was a picture of a woman standing in the very room I had just left, holding a candle. I turned to look back at the room, but it was gone. The wall was bare. A chill ran through me. The house wasn't just rearranging, it was erasing and rewriting itself while I was inside. I took a deep breath and kept walking down the corridor, glancing at each photo. Some faces were smiling, others looked frightened, and a few had been scratched out. At the end of the hall, the corridor opened into a small study. The room was cluttered with papers, maps, and more sketches of the spiral. On the desk lay another journal, this one newer and less worn. I picked it up carefully and opened to the last entry. Day 47. I realized the house is alive in its own way. It feeds on memories, changing the rooms to reflect what it wants me to see. I try to resist, but the spiral pulls harder every night. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if the house is trying to tell me something. Tomorrow, I'll try to speak to it. I closed the journal and looked around. The study felt different from the secret room. It was less oppressive but still carried a weight of secrets. I wondered who had written these entries and if they had ever succeeded in confronting whatever was controlling the house. Then I heard a faint whispering coming from the far corner of the room, soft and indistinct. I froze, listening. The sound didn't belong to the house's creaks or the wind outside. It was something else. It felt. Hello? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The whispering stopped. The room went silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. I took a step forward and saw a small door I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a bookshelf. I hesitated, then reached out and pulled it open. Inside was a narrow staircase spiraling downward, disappearing into darkness. The air that rose from the stairwell was cold and stale. I knew I couldn't ignore this. If the house was pulling me into some kind of loop, then maybe this hidden staircase was the key to breaking free or falling deeper into the spiral. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and started down the stairs. The steps creaked under my weight, and the walls closed in tighter as I descended. The whispering returned, this time clearer but still impossible to understand. At the bottom, I found a small cellar. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars filled with strange objects, dried flowers, old keys, and pieces of torn paper. In the center stood a large mirror, its surface dusty and cracked. I approached the mirror and wiped away some of the grime. For a moment, I saw only my reflection. Then the image flickered and changed. The reflection showed the room behind me, but it was different, empty, dark, and silent. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me and spun around. No one was there. I looked back at the mirror, but the reflection was normal again. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't just a house rearranging rooms. It was alive, and it was playing with me. I had to find a way out of this spiral before it consumed me too. As I turned to leave the cellar, I noticed something new on the floor, a piece of paper, folded tightly. I picked it up and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Do not trust the spiral. It will show you what you fear most to keep you here. My hand shook as I read the words. The house was warning me, or maybe taunting me. I took a deep breath and headed back up the stairs. If I wanted to break free, I had to stop running from the spiral. I had to face it head on. When I reached the main floor, the house was different again. The hallway I had walked moments before was gone, replaced by a darkened room I didn't recognize. The air was colder, heavier. And in the center of the room stood a figure, motionless, staring directly at me. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. The figure didn't move. It was a woman, pale and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Her eyes were empty, hollow. "Who are you?" I asked, voice steady despite the fear tightening my chest. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she reached out her hand, palm up. I stepped closer, drawn to her despite myself. In her hand lay a small, silver spiral pendant, gleaming faintly in the dim light. I hesitated. Taking it felt like accepting the house's challenge. But refusing might mean losing whatever chance I had left. I reached out and took the pendant. The moment it touched my skin, the woman vanished, and the room shifted again. The walls melted away, replaced by darkness. I was alone, but the spiral's pull was stronger than ever. The darkness closed in around me after the woman vanished, the walls melting away until nothing remained but the black void. I left the house that day with the pendant in my pocket and the story I never expected to tell. The Airbnb's strange rearrangements had stopped. The secrets were out. And I was free. The days that followed were a peculiar blend of relief and restless curiosity. I carried the pendant with me everywhere, its weight both comforting and heavy, like a reminder of something just beyond my understanding. Nights were no longer haunted by the shifting walls or the whispers that seemed to echo from empty corners. Instead, a quiet vigilance took their place, as though the pendant had woven a protective thread through my life, tethering me just enough to keep the abyss at bay. Yet, freedom was a complicated thing. The story I never expected to tell settled deep in my mind, threading itself into my dreams and waking hours alike. I found myself drawn back to that house, almost against my will, compelled by the need to unravel what lay beyond the black void that had swallowed the walls. What had that woman been? A ghost? A guardian? Or something older, something that existed in the spaces between moments, in the fabric of forgotten memories? I began to research, piecing together fragments from local legends and obscure folklore. The house, it seemed, had been a nexus long before it became an Airbnb. Stories spoke of a family who vanished without trace, of strange lights seen flickering through the windows on moonless nights, and of travelers who never quite left. The pendant, I learned, was a symbol, one associated with passage and protection in several mythologies. It was said to bind the wearer to the realm of spirits, allowing safe passage through places where the veil between worlds was thin. Armed with this knowledge, I went back to the town, hoping to find someone who could tell me more. The locals were wary, their eyes flickering with unease whenever the house was mentioned. A few old-timers muttered about the other side, about doors that should never be opened, and the cost of curiosity. One woman, the town librarian, shared an old leather-bound journal found in the ruins of a nearby chapel, its pages filled with cryptic notes and sketches eerily similar to the pendant's design. The journal spoke of a ritual, one performed to seal the breach between realities. It was incomplete, the last pages torn out or lost, but it hinted at a way to control the house's powers, or perhaps to finally close the black void that had swallowed me whole that night. I felt a flicker of hope mixed with dread. What if the pendant was not just a safeguard but a key? What if I had only unlocked the door and not closed it? I returned to the house once more, this time during the day. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic, like faint blood. The walls were still, the rooms no longer shifting, but the silence was oppressive. I placed the pendant on the old wooden table in the center of the main room, its surface catching stray beams of light and sending tiny rainbows flickering across the peeling wallpaper. As I stood there, the temperature dropped sharply, and a sound filled the room, a low, mournful hum that seemed to emanate from the very floor beneath my feet. The pendant began to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. The black void I had seen returned in my mind's eye, not as a terrifying nothingness but as a gateway, a threshold waiting to be crossed. I realized then that my story was far from over. The house still held its secrets, and perhaps the woman, or whatever she was, had not truly vanished. She was waiting, as was I, for the moment when the pendant would reveal its true purpose, not just as a token of survival, but as an invitation. To step through the darkness once more, but this time, to walk willingly into the unknown and uncover what lay beyond the veil. The pendant's light grew brighter, and the hum deepened into a song ancient, sorrowful, and strangely beautiful. I reached out, fingers trembling, ready to take the pendant fully into my palm. As soon as my skin brushed against its cool surface, a shiver raced up my arm, and the world around me seemed to dissolve like mist. Shapes and shadows fragmented, twisting into a kaleidoscope of color and sound that felt both alien and intimately familiar. I was no longer in my room or anywhere I could name. Instead, I stood at the edge of a vast, twilight forest, the trees whispering secrets in a language just beyond comprehension. The air was thick with the scent of moss and something metallic, like blood or rust. Somewhere in the distance, the faintest glimmer of eyes watched me, curious, cautious, perhaps waiting to decide if I was friend or foe. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was the crossing point, the threshold the pendant had promised. Here, the veil between worlds was thin, and every choice carried weight beyond the ordinary. I stepped forward, the ground soft beneath my feet, as the pendant's light pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Each step echoed like a promise, each breath a prayer. Whatever lay ahead, I was no longer running from the darkness, I was walking into it, ready to face whatever truths it held, ready to be changed. Story 3, Flicker at 3 a.m., Haunting Temporal Glitches. I always thought the strangest part of my job was the hours. Working the night shift meant the world looked different, quieter, yes, but also more alive in its own peculiar way. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed louder in the stillness. The occasional distant siren felt like a call from another universe. Time, during these hours, played tricks on you. Minutes stretched and contracted unpredictably, like taffy pulled by invisible hands. Tonight, as I settled into my usual routine, checking the monitors, jotting down notes, the soft clack of keys under my fingers, I felt that underlying tension in the air, the kind that wasn't just from the sterile chill of the office or the faint scent of coffee lingering on my jacket. It was something different, something I couldn't quite place. The clock ticked closer to 3 a.m., my least favorite hour. That's when the phone usually rang, an emergency, a question, a complaint pulling me out of any half-formed dreams or drifting thoughts. But tonight, the silence stretched longer than usual. No calls, no footsteps echoing down the hallway, no hiss of the intercom. Just the slow, steady pulse of the fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. These nights often bred a kind of loneliness that felt like a physical weight pressing down on your chest. But tonight, the loneliness seemed to pulse outward, as if the empty spaces around me were waiting for something or someone to fill them. I glanced up at the security feed. The screens displayed the usual panorama, empty corridors bathed in cold white light, the deserted lobby with its gleaming marble floors, and the parking lot beyond, where a single car sat motionless. Nothing unusual. Yet, the unease persisted. Then, the power flickered. A sudden, sharp flicker, like a stutter in the heartbeat of the building. The fluorescent lights dimmed, then surged back to their usual glow. I frowned, standing up to check the circuit breakers. Maybe a minor surge, or a faulty bulb. The building was old, after all, with wiring that had been patched up more times than I cared to count. As I walked toward the breaker panel, the intercom crackled to life, a burst of static, then silence. I pressed the button to speak, but only a whisper came through, a barely audible rustle that sent a shiver down my spine. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called, half expecting the voice of a colleague or a prankster. Nothing but silence answered. Returning to my desk, I noticed something on the corner of one monitor, a small, flickering pixel that wasn't there before. I leaned closer, trying to focus. The pixel expanded, morphing into a faint figure, a shadowy outline that seemed to shimmer and shift. I blinked, and it was gone. "Must be a glitch," I muttered, sitting down again, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The building had always been a little strange after dark, but this felt different, like the place itself was alive and watching. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and reached for the coffee mug, my fingers trembling slightly. That's when the lights went out entirely. Darkness swallowed the room, and for a moment, I was utterly blind. The hum of the fluorescent lights ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against my eardrums. I fumbled for the flashlight on my desk, the beam slicing through the black like an item. The emergency lights kicked in moments later, casting a dim red glow that barely pierced the shadows. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, and I felt that same weight of loneliness, now twisted with fear. I stood up slowly, the beam of my flashlight scanning the room as I moved. The beam caught the edge of a chair, its twisted legs casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. My heart pounded, each thump echoing louder in the silence. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath as the flashlight circle revealed the familiar clutter of my office, papers strewn haphazardly, a half-empty cup of cold coffee, the worn spine of a book left open on the desk. Yet, even in this routine chaos, something felt off, as if the darkness itself were alive, watching. I edged toward the door, the old wooden frame groaning softly under the pressure of the wind outside. The hallway beyond was a black tunnel, the emergency lights barely penetrating the gloom. I flicked my flashlight upward, the beam briefly illuminating the peeling paint and flickering exit signs smeared with grime. The silence was shattered suddenly by a faint creak, a subtle, almost imperceptible sound, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I froze, straining to listen. Another creak, closer this time. Not from the wind, not from the building settling. Feet. Soft, deliberate. Someone was there. I gripped the flashlight tighter, the cold metal digging into my palm, and took a cautious step forward. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing a shadow retreating into the far corner of the hallway. My voice caught in my throat as I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. Just the howling wind pressing against the windows and the faint, slow retreat of footsteps. My pulse quickened. Part of me wanted to run back inside and lock the door, but curiosity anchored me in place. I followed the shadow's path, each step measured and careful. As I crept toward the source, the emergency lights flickered again, threatening to plunge everything into darkness once more. The flicker revealed a figure, hunched, indistinct, half-hidden, before it disappeared behind a doorway. I hesitated, debating whether to pursue or retreat. My voice was barely a whisper this time. "Wait. Who are you?" The only response was a breathy sigh, carried away by the gusts howling through broken panes. I swallowed my fear and edged closer to the doorway, the beam steady now, ready to uncover the secrets lurking just beyond the red shadows. I stood just outside the doorway, the beam from my flashlight steady in my hand. Only silence answered. The faint hum of the train's distant engines was the only sound. I moved carefully across the room, shining my light over old benches and scattered papers. Nothing stood out. Just when I was about to call it off, I caught a glimpse of something on the floor near the far wall, a folded piece of paper yellowed and frayed. I picked it up, smoothing it out. It was a ticket stub, but not one I recognized. The date printed on it was decades old, 1963, and the destination was the same city station I was on now. That didn't make sense. How could a ticket so old appear here, tonight? I slipped it into my pocket and turned back toward the hallway. Maybe it was a clue, or maybe some leftover debris from a previous timeline. Either way, it was worth holding on to. The hallway stretched before me, empty except for the shadows cast by the flickering lights. I took a deep breath and moved forward. I had no idea what I was chasing, but I couldn't let the shadow disappear again. As I walked down the corridor, I thought about the passengers I'd seen vanish before, people stepping through doors or disappearing into thin air at different stops. The shifts in time were more than just odd events. Something was pulling them, pulling me, into these fragments of the city's past and future. When I reached the next platform, I noticed the usual crowd was missing. Instead, a few figures stood scattered, frozen in place. Their clothes and hairstyles belonged to different eras. One woman wore a flapper dress from the 1920s. A man nearby had a futuristic jacket with glowing panels. Their eyes were empty, fixed on some unseen point. I called out again, but no one moved. My stomach twisted. I'd heard about this, the time shadows they called them, people caught between shifts, trapped in limbo. I knew I had to find a way to help them or at least understand what was happening. I checked my radio, but the signal was weak, crackling with static. The normal lines of communication weren't reliable here. I was on my own. The platform clock caught my eye. The hands spun wildly, sometimes fast-forwarding, sometimes rewinding, never settling. I glanced at my own watch. It was stuck at 11:47. Not the current time, not the scheduled time, just frozen. I pocketed my watch and pulled out the ticket stub again. Maybe these broken timepieces were connected. Maybe the train wasn't just moving through space but through moments. I moved toward the edge of the platform and peered down the tracks. The rails seemed to shimmer, like a heat wave, but cooler, unnatural. The train was supposed to arrive any second, but nothing came. The silence felt heavy. Suddenly, a soft whisper brushed past my ear. I spun around, flashlight searching the empty platform. No one. The whisper repeated, unintelligible words carried on the breeze. I swallowed hard and called out, "Who's there?" No reply, just the faintest echo of footsteps fading away. I followed the sound, deeper into the station tunnels, my light bouncing off graffiti and rusted pipes. The tunnel curved sharply, and at the bend, I spotted a door ajar, light spilling out from inside. I pushed it open and stepped into a small control room, filled with old monitors and switches. The screens flickered, showing static and brief images, faces, places, moments. One monitor displayed a map of the city, but the stations were marked with different years instead of names. I touched the screen, and the map shifted, zooming in on a station labeled 1987. A photo of a missing girl flashed briefly before the screen blinked off. My heart raced. Missing persons connected to these time shifts? It made sense. Some of the passengers who vanished might never return because they'd been pulled into these fractured timelines. I scanned the room and found a logbook on a desk. The pages were filled with notes, dates, and times, records of disappearances, strange sightings, and unexplained phenomena on the train. The entries grew more frantic toward the end. One note caught my eye. Passenger 47 disappeared into 1945 stop. No recovery. Time distortion increasing. Must find way to close the loop. I felt a chill. Was I passenger 47? Was this why I couldn't leave this job, this city, this timeline? Was I stuck in a loop I couldn't break? The control room suddenly darkened, and the monitors went blank. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The whispers returned, louder now, voices overlapping in a rush of confusion and fear. I pressed my back against the door, searching the room for anything that could help. Then, one monitor flickered back to life. A grainy image appeared, a face staring directly at me. It was the shadow from the hallway, but clearer now. The eyes were hollow, desperate. The screen went black again. I sank to the floor, trying to steady my breathing. I had to find a way out. I had to understand this place before it swallowed me whole. Suddenly, the door clicked. It unlocked. I stood up cautiously and stepped back into the tunnel. The whispers faded, replaced by the distant rumble of the train arriving. I ran toward the platform, ticket stub clenched tightly. The door slid open, but instead of the train I expected, a blur of shifting lights filled the space. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The doors closed behind me. The train lurched forward, and the world shifted again. Where or when was I headed? The doors closed behind me, and the train lurched forward. I swallowed hard. The warning felt real, urgent, but I didn't know where back was. The train had taken me somewhere I hadn't planned to go. I pressed my palm against the cold wall, steadying myself. I had to figure out what was happening before I lost control completely. As I moved deeper into the station, I found a doorway at the end of the platform. It led to a narrow corridor lined with old posters and faded signs. One poster caught my eye, a missing persons notice from decades ago. The photo was grainy, but the face was familiar. It was me. Or rather, a younger version of me, from years before I ever joined transit police. I stopped and stared. How was that possible? I didn't remember being reported missing. I didn't even remember living in this part of the city back then. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The corridor ended with a rusted metal door. I hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside was a small room filled with dusty filing cabinets and a desk cluttered with papers. I rifled through the files, hoping for answers. Most of the documents were faded and illegible, but one folder stood out. It was labeled with my name and a date 10 years ago. I opened it carefully. Inside were reports about strange disappearances and unexplained time shifts on the transit lines. One note mentioned a passenger who had vanished without a trace, last seen boarding the same train I was on. The handwriting was shaky but urgent. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. The sound stopped as quickly as it had come. My pulse quickened. I wasn't alone. Something or someone was here, watching. I grabbed the ticket stub and headed back toward the platform. The monitors flickered again, this time showing a map of the transit system. But the lines were distorted, looping in impossible directions. The train wasn't just moving through time, it was caught in some kind of endless cycle. The whispers returned, low and insistent. This time, they weren't just voices, they were memories. I saw flashes of people disappearing on different platforms, of faces turning blank and fading away. I realized the passengers didn't just vanish, they became part of the timeline, trapped in moments they couldn't escape. I had to get out before that happened to me. I stepped onto the platform just as the train's rumble grew louder. The door slid open again, but this time, the scene beyond was different. The platform was crowded with people in clothes from different eras, some in old-fashioned coats, others in future tech jackets. They moved past me without noticing. I called out to one woman, hoping for a clue. She turned briefly, her eyes empty and distant, then disappeared into the crowd. I realized no one here was truly present. They were echoes, stuck between times. The train's doors began to close. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The door sealed shut behind me, and the world shifted again. The air was colder now, and the lights dimmed to near darkness. I leaned against the wall, my breath visible in the cold. I was deeper in this fractured city than ever before, and there was no sign of a way back. The ticket stub burned in my pocket. Then, the intercom crackled to life. A voice spoke, calm but chilling. You're closer than you think. But the past doesn't want to let you go. The train jolted violently, throwing me against the wall. The lights flickered once more, and I caught a glimpse through the window, a city burning, flames licking at buildings that looked. But this wasn't any fire I'd ever seen. It was a fire in time itself. I pushed myself to my feet. There was no turning back now. Whatever this place was, whatever I'd become part of, I had to find a way through it. The passengers, the timelines, the whispers, they were all pieces of a puzzle I had to solve. The train slowed, coming to a stop at another platform. The doors hissed open, and waiting there was the shadow from the hallway. It smiled. I swallowed hard, the shadow's smile stretching impossibly wide, teeth gleaming like fractured glass. It stepped forward, the air around it warping, folding like smoke caught in a sudden draft. My instinct screamed to run, but my legs remained rooted, tethered by a mix of fear and curiosity. The passengers, those fragmented echoes of lives I barely understood, pressed closer, their faces blurring, fading in and out of existence like scenes from a half-remembered dream. "You're finally here," the shadow said, voice a low rasp that seemed to resonate inside my skull. "The crossroads have chosen you." I blinked. Crossroads. The word settled in with a weight I couldn't shake. This was more than a train, more than a journey. This was a nexus, a place where timelines tangled and possibilities collided. And I was the unwitting traveler caught in the middle. "Why me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The shadow's grin faltered, just for a moment, a flicker of something almost human. "Because you're the one who sees. The one who can piece it together before everything burns away." Behind it, the platform stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of corridors branching off into darkness. The flames in the distance roared, but here, the air was cold and still. I took a step forward, then another, the weight of the unknown pressing down but somehow compelling me onward. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. The shadow extended a hand, slender and impossibly long, fingers curling like tendrils. "Follow me. But beware, every choice alters the fabric of this place. And some threads, once pulled, cannot be rewoven." Heart pounding, I reached out and took the hand. The world twisted, spinning into a cascade of light and shadow. When the vertigo faded, I found myself standing before a series of doors, each etched with symbols that shimmered and shifted. "Each door," the shadow explained, "leads to a timeline. A moment lost, a life altered. Your task is to navigate them, to find the thread that will stop the conflagration." I glanced back briefly. The passengers were gone, the whispers silenced. It was just me, the shadow, and the impossible maze ahead. "Then let's begin," I said, steeling myself against the unknown. The shadow smiled once more, and the first door creaked open. The first door groaned open, revealing a narrow hallway dimly lit by flickering bulbs overhead. The air inside smelled stale, like a room closed for years, but there was a faint sound of voices, distant and overlapping. The shadow's hand still held mine, cold and still and steady. I didn't want to let go, but I had to move forward. We stepped inside. The hallway stretched longer than it should, walls lined with peeling wallpaper showing a faded, repeating pattern of clocks. The ticking noise was faint but steady, a slow heartbeat for the place. Every door along the corridor was closed, but the voices grew louder. "Where are we?" I asked. "Not a place, but a moment," the shadow replied. Time folded back on itself. "Listen carefully. You need to find the thread that ties this moment to the others. Find it, and you may find your way out." I nodded but felt the weight of confusion settle deeper. The voices were clearer now, snippets of conversations, arguments, laughter, and fear. I stopped at the first door on the left and pressed my ear to it. A woman's voice trembled. "You promised. You said you'd be here." A man's voice answered, low and steady. "I'm trying. Something's wrong." "I can't." The door suddenly swung open, revealing a small apartment frozen in time. A woman sat on the floor, clutching a faded photograph, eyes wide and unblinking. Across from her, a man stood in the doorway, but his face was blurred, shifting. I wanted to call out, to warn them, but the shadow tugged me back before I could move closer. "Not yet," it said. "This is a fragment, not the whole." We moved on, passing door after door, each revealing a piece of the puzzle. A child crying in a playground that didn't exist anymore. A man staring at a newspaper with a date that hadn't come yet. A street corner where a woman disappeared into a crowd that vanished the instant I blinked. Each scene burned into my mind. The passengers I'd lost, the city I'd watched dissolve and reassemble, all connected here in these moments. But the thread remained elusive. At the end of the hall, a door shimmered with a silver glow. The shadow stopped. "This is the one," it said. "But be ready. What you find may change everything." I took a breath and pushed the door open. Inside was a station platform like the one I knew, but empty except for a single figure standing at the edge. It was me, only younger, cleaner, less worn. The city skyline behind me was different, unfamiliar. Hard to believe, I know. No signs of the trains, no echoes of vanished passengers. I stepped forward, heart tight. "Who are you?" I asked the other me. The figure turned slowly, eyes clear and steady. "You're the key," it said. "But you don't remember why yet. You have to choose, stay trapped in this endless cycle, or break free and face what's waiting beyond." Before I could respond, the shadow's grip tightened on my wrist. "Time won't wait," it said. "Your choice will unravel everything." I looked back at the hallway. Doors still waited, timelines still shifted, but the answer was here, in this place between moments. I swallowed hard. What happens if I make the wrong choice? The younger me smiled faintly. "Then you lose yourself." The shadow pulled me forward. The platform began to fade, the walls melting into darkness. I had no idea what I was stepping into, but I knew I couldn't turn back. And just as the world slipped away again, a voice whispered behind me, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Don't forget who you are." The whisper settled over me like a fragile promise, fragile yet unyielding. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than the now distant echoes of the platform dissolving behind me. I stepped forward, into the void, the silence stretching and folding around me like a living thing. Time felt fluid here. Seconds bled into minutes, memories intertwined with possibilities. The shadow that had pulled me forward remained close, a dark tether anchoring me to this uncertain path. I tried to grasp the words, the voice that had spoken, so familiar, yet veiled in mystery. "Don't forget who you are." But who was I, truly? Amid the fragmented echoes of choices and consequences, I had lost sight of myself. The weight of every would have pressed down, threatening to shatter the fragile balance I stood upon. I gripped my own wrist, willing myself to remember, to hold on to the essence of the person I had once been, before time began to twist and fray. A shimmer appeared ahead, faint and pulsing with iridescent light. Shapes began to coalesce, faces, places, moments. They flickered like a broken film reel, scenes of laughter and tears, of triumph and regret. Each fragment called out, a siren song tempting me to reach back, to change what was, to rewrite what had been written. But the shadow's grip tightened, a reminder that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed without sacrifice. A whisper curled around my thoughts, insistent and clear, "Choose wisely." I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, not to drown, but to anchor. The first time I had felt true joy, the moment I had lost a friend, the day I had vowed to never give up. These threads of my past wove into a tapestry stronger than any fear. When I opened my eyes, the void had shifted. The shimmering shapes resolved into a single path, illuminated just enough to guide me forward. The shadow faded, replaced by a warmth spreading from within me, a quiet certainty. I had lay the unknown, but also the possibility of redemption, of reclaiming the fragments of myself scattered across fractured timelines. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, the voice echoing once more, a lifeline in the darkness, "Don't forget who you are." And this time, I wouldn't. I stepped forward and felt the warmth spread through me. He looked up, startled to see someone who seemed like a stranger but also held something familiar. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. I just sat there, sharing the space, offering a presence I wished I'd had back then. When the train announced the next stop, I stood and walked back to the platform. The younger me watched as I boarded the train, a faint hope flickering in his eyes. I didn't look back. The train shifted again. This time, I arrived at a future version of the city. The streets were sleek and strange, with technologies I barely recognized. The people moved quickly, their faces expressionless. It felt cold, distant. I walked through the station and found a figure leaning against a wall. She looked like me, older, worn down, carrying the weight of years I hadn't yet lived. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, time. "You made it," she said, voice rough but steady. "I had to," I replied. "I had to find a way out." She nodded. "You're close. But it's not about escaping. It's about accepting." We talked for what felt like hours, sharing memories, regrets, and hopes. She told me about the choices I would make, the mistakes I would live with, and the moments I could still change. It wasn't easy to hear, but I knew she was right. When the train's bell rang again, signaling it was time to leave, she gave me a small smile. "Don't forget who you are, even when the timelines try to pull you apart." I promised I wouldn't. As I stepped back onto the train, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. The timelines weren't a trap. They were pieces of me, fragments I had to reclaim to be whole again. The rest of the journey passed without incident. Each stop revealed more pieces of my life, and with each one, I grew stronger, more certain. I wasn't just a transit police officer chasing shadows. I was someone who had survived the impossible and was ready to face whatever came next. When the final stop arrived, the train slowed and came to a quiet halt. The doors opened to the city I knew, the one I had been trying to get back to all along. The streets were familiar, alive with the sounds and smells I remembered. I stepped off the train and took a deep breath. The weight of the timelines was still there, but it no longer felt. It was a part of me, and I was ready to live with it. I walked away from the station, knowing the city would never be the same for me, but that I could finally move forward. The past, the future, they weren't enemies anymore. They were just parts of a story I was still writing. As I disappeared into the crowd, I realized I wasn't alone. The passengers who had vanished before were still out there, scattered through time. Maybe one day they'd find their way back, too. For now, I had found mine. The city breathed around me, its cacophony a strange kind of lullaby that both comforted and unsettled. Neon lights flickered above storefronts, casting fractured rainbows onto wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone hummed a slow, melancholic tune. The ordinary sounds of urban life felt different now, as if the city itself carried the memory of those lost moments, the fractured timelines that had rippled through its veins. I pulled my coat tighter, the chill of the evening pressing in, but beneath it all, there was warmth, a quiet assurance that I hadn't known in a long time. The weight I carried, the gnawing fear that I was fractured beyond repair, had lessened. It wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It was no longer a chain, but a thread woven into the tapestry of who I was becoming. Passing a cafe, I glanced inside and caught sight of a familiar face. Someone I hadn't seen since those strange days when time fractured like glass around us. His eyes, carrying the same mixture of disbelief and hope I felt, met mine briefly before he looked away, as if unsure whether to approach or flee. Maybe he was one of the scattered passengers, or maybe just a stranger caught in the same storm. Either way, it was a reminder I wasn't the only one changed, and the story was far from over. I walked on, the city's pulse syncing with mine. The crosswalk lights blinked, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the crisp night air. Somewhere ahead, laughter spilled out from a small group of friends, a sound that felt both distant and achingly close. Life was continuing, indifferent yet infinitely persistent. As I rounded a corner, I noticed a small park tucked between two towering office buildings. The benches were empty, save for a single figure sitting quietly beneath a blooming cherry tree, petals drifting slowly down like whispers from another time. I hesitated, then moved closer. "Do you ever wonder," the figure said without turning, "if it's really possible to put the pieces back together? Or are some cracks meant to be permanent?" The voice was familiar, soft but steady, carrying a weight that resonated deep within me. "I think," I answered, settling onto the bench beside them, "that the cracks let the light in. They show us where we've been broken, but also where we can grow." They nodded slowly, and for a moment, the city faded away. It was just us, two fragments of a fractured world, choosing to believe in the possibility of mending. "Maybe," they said, "the passengers who vanished aren't lost. Maybe they're just waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to guide them back." I looked up at the sky, the stars beyond the glow of the city lights twinkling faintly. The future stretched out, unknowable and vast, but no longer terrifying. It was a blank page, and I held the pen steady in my hand. "Then maybe," I said, standing to leave, "it's time to find them." And with that, I stepped back into the flow of the city, ready to face whatever came next, because the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Story 4, Room 12, The Silent Guests. I pulled off the highway just as the sun was setting behind the hills. "Single, please." She typed something into the computer and handed me a key. "Room 12. Second floor, end of the hall." I took the key, noticing her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Is there Wi-Fi here?" She hesitated. "Limited. Passwords on the back of your key card." I nodded, deciding not to press further. "Thanks." The hallway smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet felt thin under my shoes. When I reached room 12, I slid the key into the lock and stepped inside. It was basic: a bed, a small desk, a TV mounted on the wall, and a window with curtains shut tight. I closed the door behind me and sat on the bed for a moment, tired from the drive. After plugging in my phone, I went back out to explore. The hallway was empty except for a few doors, all closed. From behind one, I heard a voice say, "Good evening," in a flat, rehearsed tone. I looked toward the door but saw no one. I tried to shake off the odd feeling and headed downstairs, hoping to find someone to talk to or at least get an idea of how things worked around here. The lobby was empty now, the clerk gone. A note was taped to the front desk: breakfast 7 to 9 a.m., quiet hours 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I wandered outside to the small courtyard. A few guests sat on plastic chairs, all staring straight ahead, expressionless. When I nodded at one, he repeated, "Good evening," exactly the same way I'd heard earlier. Another guest, a woman, stood up and said, "Good evening," then retreated back into her room without another word. Something didn't feel right. I walked toward the nearest room, hoping to catch someone before they disappeared inside. The door opened slightly, and a man poked his head out. His face was blank. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Good evening," he said, stepping back inside and closing the door. I checked my watch. It was only 8 p.m., but the place already felt. On a whim, I tapped on another door, louder this time. "Who's there?" a voice asked, tense but quiet. "Just someone staying here. Trying to find the lobby or maybe a snack." "Sorry," the voice replied, "no visitors." I stepped back and looked around. Every window I passed had curtains drawn tight. I couldn't see anyone moving inside. Returning to my room, I locked the door and sat down at the desk. I tried the Wi-Fi. No connection. My phone showed no service. I was cut off. I opened the keycard to check the password again. There was nothing printed on the back. I glanced back at the door, feeling the weight of silence pressing in. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The nearest town was miles away. My instincts told me to leave, but my car was too far down the lot, and it was already dark. I lay back on the bed and listened. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then, I heard it again, a voice from down the hall, clear and deliberate, "Good evening." I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer. A chill crawled up my spine, and I forced myself to sit up, eyes straining in the dim light. The voice had come from just beyond the doorway, somewhere deep in the building's shadowed corridors. I swallowed hard. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking more than I wanted. No response. Just the distant, steady hum of the air conditioner. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. I debated whether to stay put or try to make my way toward the voice. Curiosity gnawed at me, overriding my fear. I slid off the bed, knees weak, and reached for the flashlight I had tossed on the floor earlier. The beam was narrow but bright, cutting through the darkness as I edged toward the door. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel into the unknown. The walls, once painted a sterile white, were now coated with grime and spider webs. Faint, flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows that danced with every step I took. The voice hadn't spoken again, but I felt its presence, like a whisper just out of reach. I moved forward slowly, the floorboards creaking under my weight. A door halfway down the hall stood ajar, the gap revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. I hesitated, then pushed it open with a soft groan. Inside, the room was empty except for an old wooden chair turned upside down on a dusty desk. Papers littered the floor, yellowed with age. I scanned the walls for something, anything, that might explain where I was or who had spoken to me. Suddenly, my flashlight caught a small framed photograph pinned to the wall. It was a faded black and white image of a family, smiling in front of the very building I was in. The bottom was inscribed with a date, 1947. A sudden noise made me whirl around, a low thud, like something heavy being dragged across the floor somewhere behind me. My heart hammered as I shone the light down the hallway. The door at the end was now wide open, revealing a stairwell leading down into darkness. I debated again whether to run back to the room and barricade myself or descend into the unknown below. But the voice echoed once more, clearer this time, a whisper just beyond comprehension, "Don't be afraid." Despite everything in me screaming to flee, I found myself stepping toward the stairs, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. Each step down felt colder, the air thickening, the silence stretching taut like a drawn wire. At the bottom, the light flickered and died, plunging me into darkness save for the thin cone of my flashlight. Then, just ahead, something shifted, a figure, barely visible but unmistakably there, standing motionless in the gloom. The voice came again, this time just behind me, soft and close, "Welcome back." I spun around, but no one was there. The shadows pressed in, and the temperature dropped so sharply I could see my breath in the stale air. My mind raced. Was I dreaming? Had I stumbled into some forgotten place where time folded back on itself? I forced myself to speak, voice steady despite the tremble inside. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure stepped forward into the light of my flashlight, revealing features both familiar and strange. It was a man, but his eyes held a weight of sorrow and a glimmer of hope. "Someone who has been waiting," he said softly. "For you." I swallowed hard and took a deep breath, realizing then that whatever had brought me here was far bigger than me, or the car in the lot, or the call I never made. This was a crossing point, a threshold I hadn't known I was meant to find. And now, there was no turning back. The man's words echoed in the cold air as he stepped back into the shadows. I frowned. The curfew explained the silence outside, but it didn't explain the strange behavior or the presence of that man in the dark. I wanted to call 0, but my phone had no service, and I hadn't seen a landline in my room. I checked the hallway again, this time paying attention to the other doors. Many had notes taped to them, typed messages, identical in font and wording. One read, "Quiet hours in effect. Please respect your neighbors." Another said, "Reminder, please use your room phone for all requests." I knocked on a nearby door, tentative. No answer. I heard a faint rustling, then a voice, calm and flat, "Please do not disturb." I stepped back, my skin prickling. It was. The next morning, I woke early, the sunlight leaked through the thin curtains. My mind was restless, turning over the night's events and the man's strange words. I decided to explore the motel more thoroughly during the day. I started with the office. The door was locked, but I found a maintenance key taped under the front desk. I slipped it into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open to reveal a small, cluttered room filled with files, papers, and a desktop computer. The computer was on standby. I pressed the power button and waited as it booted up, the screen flickering to life. The desktop was locked, but I noticed a sticky note attached to the monitor. User, admin, password, 1974. I typed in the password, and the desktop unlocked. A folder labeled Guest Records caught my eye. I opened it and found spreadsheets listing names, arrival dates, and notes. Most names were familiar, common, everyday names, but the notes column was unusual. For several guests, the notes read, "Participating in Study 27B. Isolation Protocol active." Others were marked Observation Phase or Behavioral Compliance confirmed. I blinked, heart pounding. A study? Isolation protocol? Was this motel a front for some kind of experiment? I dug deeper and found scanned documents, consent forms with signatures, and research reports. The forms mentioned a social isolation study designed to analyze human behavior under controlled conditions. The participants had been told they were staying in a motel for a retreat, but the true purpose was concealed. The reports detailed the protocol. Guests were required to stay in their rooms, maintain minimal interaction, and repeat specific phrases during brief check-ins. Their expressions and behavior were monitored remotely. I felt a wave of nausea. I wasn't just a guest here. I was a subject, trapped in an experiment with no way out. I heard footsteps outside the office door and quickly closed the laptop. The door handle rattled, then stopped. No one entered. I slumped into the chair, the reality settling over me. I had to find a way to contact the outside world, to prove what was happening here. But how? Back in the hallway, I noticed a narrow stairwell leading to the basement. It hadn't been marked on the motel map. I hesitated, then decided to check it out. Maybe there was equipment or more clues down there. The basement door was unlocked. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of chemicals. Along the walls were rows of monitors, speakers, and wires connected to small cameras discreetly placed in the rooms upstairs. A bank of screens showed the faces of the guests, each expression blank, repeating the same phrases. I am safe. I am comfortable. I understand the instructions. I shuddered. It was like watching people trapped inside their own minds, puppets in a carefully controlled setting. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the speakers. Subject 12, please confirm compliance. I froze. That was me. Someone was watching and speaking directly to the rooms. I hurried back upstairs, heart racing. If they could communicate like this, I had no privacy, no chance to plan without being overheard. In my room, I opened the window slightly, hoping for some fresh air. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next. Then, I heard it again, the voice, soft and close, from the hallway, welcome back. I looked out the window into the parking lot. No one was there. But the feeling lingered. I was being watched, waiting for something I couldn't yet understand. I knew then that escaping this place wouldn't be easy. The walls weren't just physical, they were psychological, built to keep us all inside. And now, I was part of their experiment. A shiver ran down my spine as I turned away from the window, every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. The corridor outside stayed silent, but shadows seemed to twist just beyond my sight, teasing the edge of reality. I forced myself to move, to act. Slowly, I edged toward the door, careful not to make a sound. Maybe, if I could slip out unnoticed, I could find someone else, anyone, who understood what was happening. But as my hand reached for the handle, a cold breath brushed my ear. You can't leave, the voice whispered again, barely audible yet unmistakably real. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw only the empty hallway. The walls seemed to close in, and the oppressive weight of the experiment pressed down harder than ever. There was no going back now. I stood frozen, the whisper hanging in the air. Privacy? I pressed. But why does everyone say the same things? And why won't anyone talk to me? He shrugged and returned to his screen. We serve a unique clientele. They're here for personal reasons. It's best to respect their space. That answer felt like a lie, but I didn't want to push too hard. Instead, I watched the other guests from a distance. Every few hours, a few of them shuffled to the bathroom or the lobby, but they never lingered. The repetition of their phrases echoed in my head, phrases I'd overheard through the thin walls. Always the same, always calm. I'm fine, everything is okay, no need to worry. Later that afternoon I tried knocking on a neighboring room. The door opened a crack and a woman peered out. She had the same expression everyone else wore, blank, almost rehearsed. Are you okay? I asked. She smiled faintly but didn't answer. Instead, she repeated, everything is okay. No need to worry. I pressed, do you want to get out of here? Do you know why we're stuck? Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I thought I saw something. Then she closed the door without another word. I realized then that these people weren't just avoiding me, they were scared. Maybe scared of what might happen if they broke the pattern. That night, I stayed awake, listening. The corridors were silent, but I could hear faint footsteps now and then, deliberate, tearful. I began to suspect someone was watching me constantly, maybe even controlling what happened here. I thought about the voice again. It had sounded close, almost right behind me. Whoever it was wanted me to stay, but I needed to find out why. The next morning, I found a maintenance door near the end of the hall that I hadn't noticed before. It was unlocked. I hesitated, then slipped inside. The room beyond was small, cramped, and filled with monitors and sound equipment. Screens showed live feeds of every hallway, every door. A single man sat in front of them, his face pale under the harsh light. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across his features. You're not supposed to be here, he said quietly. How did you get in? I'm trying to understand what this place is, I said. Why everyone stays in their rooms. Why they all say the same things. He sighed and leaned back. You're part of the study now. There's no leaving. Study? I repeated, my mind racing. What kind of study? He explained that the motel was a controlled environment designed to observe social isolation and conformity. Each guest was selected and monitored, their behaviors recorded to see how people reacted under extreme solitude and limited interaction. You can't leave because it would ruin the experiment, he said. We need to keep everyone isolated to maintain the data's integrity. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. This wasn't some accidental trap. It was deliberate. I was a subject in an experiment I hadn't agreed to. Is there a way out? I asked. He shook his head. Not without consequences. I stepped back, my mind spinning. The walls weren't just physical barriers, they were part of a system designed to break us down, to control us through isolation and repetitive routines. I left the room quietly and locked the door behind me. There was no turning back now. I was trapped inside a study that treated people like lab rats, and the people here, the guests, were all prisoners of this psychological cage. I needed to find a way to outsmart them, to break the pattern. But I wasn't sure if I had the strength or the time. That night, the whispers returned, louder and closer. You can't leave. I stared at the door, knowing the experiment was watching me. And waiting. The murmurs twisted into fragmented phrases, slipping through the cracks of my mind like acid rain. You're part of the game, they hissed. No exit, no mercy. I pressed my back against the cold wood, fighting the rising panic clawing at my chest. Somewhere beyond the walls, footsteps shuffled, deliberate, measured, echoing the rhythm of my own erratic heartbeat. I scanned the room in desperate search of an advantage. The cluttered shelves held dusty tomes and strange apparatuses, but nothing that promised escape. A journal lay open on the desk, its pages yellowed with age and scrawled with indecipherable notes. I flipped through it frantically, grasping for clues. Between the ramblings, a phrase stood out. The key lies within the observer's own shadow. A shiver ran down my spine. Was this a hint? Or just another cruel taunt? I glanced down at the floor, the dim light casting a distorted silhouette beside me. Could my own shadow be the key? The idea felt absurd, yet I had nothing to lose. Steeling myself, I traced the edges of the shadow with trembling fingers, feeling the chill seep into my skin. Suddenly, a faint click echoed from beneath the desk. A hidden compartment sprung open, revealing a small, ornate key. Hope surged through me, bright and sudden. The whispers ceased as I gripped the key tightly, the silence pressing heavy but welcome. With trembling hands, I approached the door, inserted the key, and turned. The lock gave way, but the door creaked open to reveal not freedom, but another corridor, endless, dark, and inscrutable. The study was only the beginning. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor that stretched into darkness. I recognized some of the names from the few guests I'd seen wandering the lobby earlier. The rest were unfamiliar. My room was listed as active. But what did this all mean? Suddenly, a soft click sounded behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. I stepped back toward the door, then stopped. I realized it had locked automatically behind me. I was trapped again. Panic flared, but I forced it down. The key might open this door too, but I hadn't found any other locks to try it on yet. I took a deep breath and focused on the control panel. As I scanned the screen, a pattern emerged. The unresponsive entries all had times next to them, some for days, some for weeks. The active ones changed every few hours. It looked like someone was monitoring the guests, tracking their behavior or condition. I pressed the closest button under active and the screen switched to a live feed. My eyes widened as I saw a grainy black and white video of a room. The occupant sat motionless in a chair, staring directly at the camera. It was one of the other guests. The same blank expression I'd noticed before. I tried to shut it off, but the screen flickered and switched to another feed, then another. Each room showed the same thing, a guest isolated, never moving, trapped in their own silent cell. The idea hit me hard. This wasn't just a motel. It was some kind of experiment, some social isolation study. But the scale was bigger than I thought. Everyone here was being watched, controlled. I looked back down at the list. My name was still active. Did that mean I was being monitored too? Was I part of the study? Had I been from the moment I checked in? I pressed a switch labeled override just to see what would happen. The screen blinked, then a soft mechanical sound hummed through the walls. I heard distant voices, muffled but urgent. Then, the panel shut off completely. The corridor lights dimmed until the hallway was almost pitch black. I fumbled for the key, but it had vanished from my hand. I called out, my voice cracking. "Hello? Is anyone there? I need help." No response. Just silence. I moved forward, feeling along the walls for another door or an exit. My fingers brushed a small metal plate set into the wall. I pressed it, and a hidden door slid open without a sound. Beyond was a narrow staircase leading down. The air smelled stale and cool. I had no idea where it went, but staying in the corridor was impossible. I stepped inside and began descending. At the bottom, I found a windowless room filled with rows of monitors and computers. Several screens showed live footage from all over the motel. The faces of the guests stared back at me, empty, unblinking. Some had tears running down their cheeks, others simply sat. A chair was pushed back in front of a console, and an ID badge lay on the desk. It read Dr. Langston. I grabbed the badge and the nearest microphone. "Dr. Langston," I said loudly, hoping for a response. "You're conducting this study, aren't you? What is this place? Why are you doing this?" Static crackled through the speaker, then a calm voice answered. "You've discovered the control center. Please remain where you are. We will send assistance shortly." I swallowed hard. Assistance? I want out. I'm not part of any study. Let me go. The voice was calm but firm. Your participation is mandatory for the study to continue. We advise you to comply. I slammed my hand on the desk. I won't be a subject in your experiment. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Resistance is expected. Please understand, this is for your own benefit." The line went dead. I sat back, the weight of the situation crushing me. I was trapped in a motel turned prison, monitored constantly, and there was no sign of an escape. Yet, if they were watching me, maybe I could use that. I scanned the room for anything useful. There were keyboards and phones, but no obvious way to call for help outside. The windows were too small and covered with thick bars. Then, a new message popped up on one of the screens. It was a text, "Welcome to the study. Your cooperation will improve outcomes." Below it, a countdown began. 30 minutes. I tried to think clearly. What would they expect me to do? How could I turn this to my advantage? As the seconds ticked down, I felt a flicker of resolve. I wasn't going to give up. I had to find a way out, no matter what this place wanted from me. The countdown hit 0, and the monitors went dark. The silence returned, heavier than before. I stood up and forced the door open behind me. Back on the stairs, I faced the endless corridor again. I had to keep moving. There was no turning back now. The corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights that cast long, unsettling shadows. Each step echoed softly against the cold walls, reminding me how alone I was. Somewhere deep down, a voice urged caution, but another whispered that hesitation meant defeat. I gripped the edge of the railing, steadying myself. Whatever lay ahead, I confronted head-on because the only way forward was through the unknown. The corridor stretched out before me, dim and empty except for the flickering lights overhead. Welcome. Your cooperation will improve outcomes. Resistance prolongs distress. Compliance ensures comfort. I slammed the folder shut. That message wasn't comforting. It was a threat. I looked around the room, hoping to find a way to contact someone outside this place. There was no phone line, no internet connection. The only link was this control system, and it was locked down tight. Then I noticed a small note taped under the desk. It said, "Emergency Override Code, 1742. I typed the code into the tablet. The screen blinked, then a new menu opened: doors, locks, cameras, power. I accessed the door controls. The front door was still locked, but the override option was there. I hesitated. If I opened the door, what would happen? Would someone be waiting outside? Would the researchers intervene? I pressed unlock. The front door clicked. I ran down the stairs and pulled the door open. Fresh air hit my face, cold but real. I stepped outside and saw the empty parking lot bathed in moonlight. No cars, no people. Just silence. I walked to the edge of the lot and looked out to the road. No signs of traffic. No lights from nearby towns. I pulled out my phone, no signal. I was free from the motel, but I was still trapped in the middle of nowhere. As I walked back toward the building, I noticed movement near the far edge of the lot. A man in a plain jacket was standing by a white van, watching me. He said nothing, just stared. I stopped. He took a step forward and pulled out a clipboard. "Subject 17, he said calmly. "You're outside the parameters now." I narrowed my eyes. "I'm done with this. I'm leaving." He shook his head. "You don't understand. This isn't just a hotel. You agreed to participate. Leaving isn't an option." "Who are you?" I asked. "Research staff. Part of the study team. You're not safe outside." I laughed bitterly. "Safe? You locked me in against my will. You made me repeat phrases. You watched me break down. How is that safe?" He didn't answer. Instead, he motioned toward the van. "Come back inside. It's better for you." "No," I said firmly. "I want to leave." The man's expression didn't change. "We can't let you. It's for your own good." I stepped back, then turned and started toward the road. The man followed silently but didn't try to stop me. I walked until the road curved out of sight. The night air was sharp, and I realized I had no idea where I was going. But I was moving forward, away from that place and everything it stood for. The next morning, I found a gas station a few miles down the highway. The attendant called the local police after I explained what had happened. They took me seriously once I showed them the files and the photos I'd taken on my phone before it lost signal. An investigation followed. The motel was raided, and the study was shut down. The researchers faced charges for false imprisonment and unethical human experimentation. I spent weeks in therapy, trying to process what I'd been through. The isolation, the manipulation, it left scars deeper than I expected. But I also learned something important. No matter how much they tried to control me, I still had a choice. I chose to fight. I chose to leave. Looking back, I realized I wasn't just a subject in their experiment. I was a survivor. And survivors don't disappear quietly. The motel is gone now. The land is empty, silent. Sometimes I think about the others who stayed behind, the ones who never left their rooms. I hope they find their way out someday, but I also know that the strength to escape has to come from within. For me, that strength came from refusing to accept their version of reality. I found my own path. And that made all the difference. The silence that now blankets the land feels less like emptiness and more like a breath held in suspense. The motel's absence is a stark reminder of what once was a place where fear and control masked themselves as routine. But in that void, I see possibility. The ground beneath the cracked pavement is fertile, not just for weeds, but for new beginnings. Sometimes, when the wind picks up, I swear I hear faint whispers carried from the past, echoes of voices that never dared to speak out loud. They haunt the spaces between memory and reality, urging me to keep moving forward, to keep telling the story. Because stories are powerful, they refuse to be buried or erased. They hold the key to understanding, to healing, and to change. I've learned that surviving isn't a single act but a continuous choice, one that demands courage every day. It's in the small moments, choosing honesty over silence, hope over despair, connection over isolation. It's a defiance that doesn't roar but persists quietly, steadily, like a flame that refuses to be extinguished. And so, I walk forward, carrying the weight of what was but also the light of what could be. The path isn't clear or easy, but it's mine. The motel may be gone, but the story lives on, etched in memory, whispered on the wind, and written into the very fabric of who I am now. Survivors don't disappear quietly. We endure, we resist, and we reclaim our truth, one step at a time. Story 5, Restroom Keys, Doors to Otherworldly Terrors. The night shift started. The night shift started. As the clock struck 8, the hum of machinery and the low murmur of distant conversations filled the sprawling facility. The fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow across the rows of workstations where the night crew settled in, their faces half shadowed by the dimmer overhead bulbs reserved for nocturnal operations. For most, this was just another shift, a routine interlude between dusk and dawn, but for some, the night carried an intangible weight, a quiet urgency that daylight hours never quite captured. Evelyn slipped through the narrow corridors with practiced ease, her footsteps muffled against the cold, polished concrete. She had inherited the night shift's unspoken codes long ago. Keep your head down, avoid unnecessary chatter, and above all, respect the silence. It wasn't just a matter of etiquette, the night held secrets, and those who pried too openly were often met with stubborn walls or worse, whispered warnings. Tonight, though, felt different. As she made her way to her station near the control hub, Evelyn's fingers brushed lightly against the metallic railing, a faint tremor coursing through her. The usual stillness wasn't just still, it seemed pregnant with expectation, like the air before a storm. She shook off the feeling and plugged her badge into the terminal, the screen flickering to life with data streams and monitoring grids. Around her, the night crew was already immersed in their tasks. Marcus, the technician with the perpetually tired eyes, was scanning through anomaly reports, his brow furrowed as he juggled multiple alerts. Across the room, Lena adjusted the dials on the environmental control panel, occasionally glancing at the sensor readouts with a meticulous eye. Each person moved with a steady rhythm, their collective focus an anchor against the creeping fatigue of the night. Evelyn settled into her chair, pulling up the latest surveillance feeds on her monitor. The facility was vast, a labyrinth of chambers and tunnels extending deep beneath the surface. Cameras dotted every corner, but even their watchful electronic gaze couldn't quell the creeping unease she sometimes felt. Tonight, the feed showed nothing out of the ordinary, no flickers, no glitches, no signs of unauthorized movement. Still, her instincts whispered otherwise. The minutes stretched into hours. Evelyn's gaze darted between monitors, logs, and the softly blinking lights of the control console. Every so often, she caught the faintest ripple on one of the sensor arrays, a subtle, almost imperceptible fluctuation that could have been dismissed as background noise. But her instincts nudged her to pay attention. At 11:43 p.m., the facility's alert system chimed softly, a gentle but insistent tone that set several heads turning toward their screens. Evelyn's heart quickened as she scanned the source. A sensor near the eastern storage wing had detected a spike in electromagnetic activity. Not uncommon on its own, but the timing was curious. The readings were brief, lasting only a few seconds before dissipating into normal levels. She opened a communication channel. "Marcus, have you seen anything unusual on your end?" "No anomalies," Marcus replied, his voice low but steady. "Isolated spike, probably interference. Maybe a sensor glitch." Evelyn nodded, though unease gnawed at her. "I'll keep monitoring." The next 15 minutes unfolded in tense quiet. The spike did not recur, and the facility's systems remained stable. Yet Evelyn's mind raced, weaving through possibilities. Was it a malfunction? Or something else? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to cross-reference the sensor's history when a sudden flicker caught her eye. One of the camera feeds, the one overlooking the corridor leading to the storage wing, briefly dimmed, as if the lens had been momentarily obscured. She zoomed in, enhancing the image frame by frame, but saw nothing definitive. No figures, no shadows. Just a soft blur that quickly faded back to a clear view. Evelyn's heart pounded. Could it have been a glitch in the feed? Or was someone tampering with the camera? The storage wing housed sensitive equipment and valuable supplies, nothing to be taken lightly. She toggled to the security logs, scanning for any unauthorized access or anomalies during the past hour. There was a single entry marked "Manual Override," timestamped just 5 minutes ago. The operator ID was unfamiliar, unknown. Evelyn frowned. The system shouldn't allow any user without clearance to execute such commands. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, initiating a trace on the override command. The origin pointed to a terminal in the West Wing, an area currently unoccupied, according to personnel schedules. She tapped into the layout schematics, pinpointing the terminal's exact location. It was a small maintenance nook, usually locked, and certainly off-limits without proper keys. A faint beep from her comm unit startled her. A message flashed on the screen, encrypted but clearly urgent. Evelyn decrypted it with practiced ease. "Evelyn, stop checking. You're too close." The text sent a chill down her spine. Someone was watching her, or at least monitoring her actions. But who? And why? Her gaze shifted to the shadows beyond the screens, the quiet hum of the bass suddenly feeling oppressive. Evelyn's mind raced. Was this a warning? Or a threat? She needed answers, but also caution. Whoever sent the message had access, control, and possibly intentions far darker than a mere system glitch. Determined, she prepared to head toward the West Wing terminal, knowing each step could bring her closer to uncovering the truth or deeper into danger. The message on my comm unit kept running through my mind as I stood by the terminal in the West Wing. I frowned. I asked around the next day, trying to get the name of the supervisor mentioned in the note. No one seemed to know who it was, or if that person still worked there. The staff was small and tight-lipped, and when I brought up the keys, I noticed some faces going pale or avoiding my gaze. I also checked the gas station's inventory and maintenance logs. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for one thing: the cleaning crew had reported missing supplies several times over the past month. When I followed up, one of the cleaners mentioned hearing strange noises near the back storage area at night. No one took it seriously until now. I decided to visit the storage area myself. It was a small, cluttered room with boxes of supplies and some old furniture pushed into the corners. I looked for anything that might relate to the keys or the strange doors. Behind a stack of crates, I found a loose panel on the wall, just big enough for a hand to fit through. Inside the panel was a set of old, faded maps and some handwritten notes. The maps weren't of the gas station, but the surrounding area: roads, buildings, wooded patches. The notes referenced locations that matched the places I'd seen behind the restroom doors: an abandoned house, a clearing deep in the woods, a rundown motel. One note caught my eye. It was a list of names with times next to them, along with brief descriptions: John 10:15 p.m. waiting, Karen 11:30 p.m. no show, unknown 2 a.m. left early. It looked like some kind of schedule or record of people coming and going. I pocketed the notes and maps, feeling the weight of what I'd found. This wasn't just about strange doors. Someone was using the gas station as a hub for something secret and probably dangerous. Back at the counter, I tried calling the number listed on one of the maps. A woman answered, her voice calm but guarded. When I asked about the places on the map, she said she didn't know what I was talking about and hung up. I realized then that I was dealing with people who didn't want to be found. The gas station wasn't just remote, it was a meeting point for something hidden in plain sight. The next night, I stayed late after my shift, watching the cameras again. I noticed a figure approaching the back door around midnight, the one that usually led to the woods. The person carried a backpack and moved quickly, glancing over their shoulder. I wanted to follow, but I knew I couldn't just walk outside and chase after them. The area was vast and dark, and I had no idea what I'd find. Instead, I grabbed one of the restroom keys, the one that unlocked the door to the woods, and slipped it into my pocket. If the key really opened a door to somewhere dangerous, I needed to be prepared. As midnight approached, I heard the back door click open. I stayed hidden behind the counter, watching the monitor. The figure disappeared into the trees. My hands shook as I debated what to do next. I could wait it out, hoping the person would come back, or I could take the risk and try to follow through the door myself. I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to stop until I knew the truth. And whatever was waiting beyond those doors wasn't going to let me go easily. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the cold bite of the night air that seeped through the cracks around the door frame. The faint rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl filled the silence, but I couldn't let my senses dull for a second. Gripping the edge of the counter, I eased the door open just enough to slip out without making a sound. The gravel crunched softly beneath my shoes as I stepped into the shadowed yard, eyes darting to where the figure had vanished. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the moonlit sky. I forced my legs to move forward, guided only by the faint glow of the street lamp down the block. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away if anyone or anything was listening. The air tasted metallic, thick with tension, and every step felt heavier than the last. Suddenly, a glimmer caught my eye, a flash of something reflective just beyond the second row of pines. Without thinking, I veered toward it, pushing past low-hanging branches that clawed at my jacket. There, half buried in the underbrush, lay a small, worn notebook. I crouched down and picked it up, fingers trembling as I flipped through pages filled with scrawled notes and cryptic symbols. The handwriting was frantic, almost desperate, mentioning dates, locations, and repeated references to the signal and the watcher. A sudden snap nearby made me freeze. Somewhere in the darkness, movement stirred. I swallowed hard, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. Whoever had been here before me wasn't far off, and they clearly didn't want their secrets uncovered. The weight of the mystery pressed down on me, demanding answers even as fear gnawed at my resolve. I slipped the notebook inside my coat and glanced back toward the shop. I hadn't yet figured out what the signal was or who the watcher might be, but I knew the truth was buried deeper in the night, and I was closer than ever to finding it. Whatever waited in those shadows, I would face it head on. Because some truths refuse to stay hidden forever. I stayed crouched in the underbrush, the worn notebook pressed against my chest. Relief washed over me. At least I wasn't alone in this now. When Marcy arrived, she didn't waste time on small talk. "You sounded serious," she said as she stepped inside, glancing around like she expected someone to be watching us. I handed her the notebook. "I found this in the woods. It's connected to the keys and the restrooms. I think there's more going on here than just a creepy gas station." She flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing. "The signal, the watcher, sounds like someone's been tracking people coming and going. Have you used more than one key?" I nodded. "I tried the one for the woods. It took me there. There's another that leads to an abandoned building near the edge of town. And the others? I don't know yet." Marcy looked up sharply. "You can't keep doing that. Those places aren't safe, not at night. People have vanished around here before, and no one's ever found them." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," I said. "And I think whoever wrote this notebook was trying to warn people. Or maybe find a way out." She shut the notebook and looked me in the eye. "You're in deeper than you realize. We need to figure out who's behind this before it's too late." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the old air conditioner rattled louder than before. Marcy's expression tightened. "That's been happening all night. Like they're trying to mess with the power." I checked the monitors behind the counter. Nothing unusual, but the thought of someone messing with the station's systems made my skin crawl. Then the doorbell chimed. A man walked in, tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket pulled tight against the cold. His eyes scanned the room before settling on us. He moved with purpose, and I could tell he wasn't just a customer. Marcy stepped back, her voice low. "You don't want to be here." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just here to talk. I know what you found." My breath caught. How did he know? Marcy glanced at me and whispered, "Stay calm. Don't let him see you're scared." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, holding it up. The same symbols and notes from the notebook were scrawled across it. "You're getting too close," he said. "Some doors are better left closed." I wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, but my voice caught in my throat. The notebook felt heavier in my coat pocket, a silent reminder that I couldn't turn back now. Marcy's eyes never left the man. "We're not afraid of you." He laughed softly. "You will be." Before I could react, he turned and walked out, the bell ringing behind him. Marcy exhaled sharply. This just got serious. No more mistakes. We either figure this out together or we end up. I nodded, feeling the truth in her words settle deep inside me. The gas station wasn't just a job anymore. It was a trap, and the keys were the locks. The only question was who held the real control and how far they'd go to keep it. Marcy's words echoed in my mind as the door's chime faded into the heavy silence that settled over the station. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to stretch longer than before, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, listening. I took a steadying breath, forcing my hands to unclench from the counter's edge. The air tasted metallic, thick with the aftermath of fear. "We need a plan," I whispered, more to myself than to Marcy. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the aisles as if the shelves might suddenly betray secrets. "First, we get all the camera's footage from today," she said, pulling out her phone. If he was watching us, maybe we can see where he came from, or if anyone else is involved. Her fingers danced over the screen, already searching for the security login. I nodded again, the weight in my chest easing just a little at the thought of some control. Maybe there was a way out of this after all. But as I reached for the phone to help, a new sound made us both freeze. The doorbell jingled, soft but deliberate. The hairs on my neck stood straight. We hadn't heard the chimes since the man left. "Who the hell?" Marcy muttered, moving cautiously toward the front. I followed, heart pounding, eyes darting to the cramped aisles. Nobody should be here. Not at this hour, not after what just happened. The door creaked open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the fading dusk outside. A woman stepped in, her eyes bright but kind, carrying a worn leather bag slung casually over her shoulder. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen her before. "Sorry to bother you," she said softly, voice steady despite the quiet tension. "I'm looking for someone, my brother. He works here, I think. His name's Jason." Marcy exchanged a glance with me, then nodded. "Jason's not here right now. Why don't you tell us what's going on?" The woman hesitated, then stepped fully inside, her gaze flickering briefly to the back office door. "It's complicated. There's something wrong. I think he got involved with the wrong people, and now I'm worried. I traced him here because of some odd activity on his phone." She pulled it out, unlocking it with trembling fingers. "What kind of activity?" I asked, stepping forward. She swallowed hard. "Encrypted messages. Threats. And a name keeps popping up, the broker. I don't know who it is, but whoever it is, they're dangerous." Marcy crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "Sounds like your brother's deeper in this than we thought." I glanced at the flickering fluorescent lights again. The shadows weren't just on the walls, they were creeping into every corner of this place. And now, it wasn't just us trapped, we had someone else's danger sprawling into our lives. "We need to find Jason," I said firmly. "If he's connected to this broker, then we're all in more trouble than we realized." The woman nodded, relief mingling with fear in her eyes. "Thank you. I didn't know where else to go." As she spoke, a sudden chill swept over the room, and I knew the clock was ticking faster than ever. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher. Whatever held the keys to this lock wasn't just a person anymore, it was a web, and we were caught right in the center. I sat back down behind the counter, the weight of Marcy's words pressing down on me. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that every key I'd found, the ones that opened those strange doors, were somehow tied to him. And if these keys were connected to places where people could get trapped, it was clear Jason was in deeper trouble than I thought. "I need to find him," I said, more to myself than to Marcy. "Before someone else gets hurt." She nodded, eyes wide with worry. "I can help. I've got contacts, people who know things. Maybe I can find out who the broker is." I wasn't sure if I should trust her, but right now, I didn't have many options. I grabbed a ring of keys from the counter and turned them over in my hand. Each one felt heavier tonight. "Let's start with the places these keys open," I said. "If we can map them out, maybe we can figure out where Jason might be hiding." Marcy pulled out her phone and I watched as she typed quickly. "There's a pattern," she said after a moment. "Some of these places have been reported abandoned houses, isolated woods, even some private properties where people have disappeared." I frowned. "Disappearances?" "Yeah. Mostly people who went looking for something or someone and never came back." She looked up at me, her face pale. The thought made my stomach twist. I tested one of those keys last night, the one that led to that empty, dark room with the broken windows. I barely made it out before the door locked behind me. If those places were dangerous and people were vanishing, then we weren't dealing with accidents. Someone was using those doors to trap people on purpose. We need to check the surveillance tapes from the gas station, I said. Maybe someone's been coming here at night who shouldn't be. Marcy nodded again, and I led her to the back office. The security system was outdated, but it recorded everything. I clicked through the footage from the last few nights, scanning for anything unusual. At first, it was just the usual cars pulling in, customers filling up, the occasional trucker stopping for coffee. But then, around 2:15 a.m. 2 nights ago, something caught my eye, a figure standing just outside the restroom door. The person was tall, wearing a hooded jacket, face shadowed. They didn't come inside but stood there for several minutes, fidgeting with something in their hands. Then they slipped something under the door before walking away. I paused the video and rewound it. Did you see that? Marcy leaned over my shoulder. What was it? I zoomed in on the object left under the door. It looked. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the restroom, heart pounding. The station was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. I knelt down and picked up the paper. It was a folded note, damp and crumpled. Back at the office, I unfolded it carefully. The message was short. You're getting close. Stop now, or you won't get out. Marcy's breath hitched. It's a warning. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just about Jason anymore. Whoever the broker was, they knew I was poking around. Do you think these keys are all part of some bigger plan? I asked. Marcy nodded. I think so. Whoever controls the broker controls those places. And from what I've heard, the broker doesn't. The room felt colder again. I glanced at the ring of keys on the desk. Each one was a door to somewhere dangerous, a trap waiting to snap shut. We need to move fast, I said. I want to try one more door tonight. The one Jason mentioned in his last message, the cabin in the woods. It's the only place left on this list we haven't checked. Marcy looked uneasy but didn't argue. I grabbed the key labeled cabin. The metal felt cold in my hand. Outside, the night was thick with silence. I locked up the station's front doors and headed to the back exit, where the door to the restrooms was. The key slid into the lock smoothly, but when I turned it, the air shifted. The door didn't open to the station's crowded parking lot but swung wide into a narrow dirt trail lined with dense trees. The scent of pine and damp earth hit me immediately. I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind me. The gas station was gone. There was only the forest and the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the branches. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but the screen was black, no signal. I tried again, nothing. I knew better than to panic. I'd been trapped in places like this before, but this time felt different. The woods were too quiet. No animals, no wind. Just the sound of my own footsteps. I followed the trail, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the dark. After a few minutes, I saw it, a small cabin, barely visible through the trees. The porch light was on, casting long shadows. I approached cautiously, every sense alert. Suddenly, the door creaked open and a man stepped out. He was tall, lean, wearing a plain jacket and jeans. His eyes were sharp, calculating. You're not supposed to be here, he said quietly but firmly. I'm looking for Jason, I said. I need to find him. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Jason's in trouble. You should leave before it's too late. Why? What's going on here? Who's the broker? I pressed. The man's jaw tightened. You're deeper in the mess than you think. But if you want answers, come inside. I hesitated. The door behind me was closed. There was no way back unless he let me leave. Come on, he said again, stepping aside. I took a breath and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. And the sound echoed in the small cabin. I swallowed hard, still trying to make sense of everything. Jason. Where is he? Is he okay? Paul's expression tightened. Jason got in over his head. When he found out what the keys really opened, he tried to shut it down. The broker doesn't. Jason disappeared soon after. Do you know where the broker is? I asked. He shook his head. No one does. He stays clean, keeps his distance. But he's got people watching everywhere. That's why those keys are so dangerous. I looked at the keys in my pocket. Each one was a door to a place that could swallow me whole. The thought of Jason trapped somewhere, or worse, made me want to act. How do I find Jason? How do I get out of this? Paul leaned forward. You don't. Not on your own. The only way is to cut the connection between the keys and those places. The broker system runs on a network, physical locks tied to these locations. If you can find the central hub, you can disable it. Where? Old warehouse on the far side of town. It looks abandoned, but it's not. That's where the broker controls everything. I nodded. What about you? Why help me? Paul hesitated. Because I lost someone too. And I want it to end. We spent the next hour making a plan. I memorized the route to the warehouse, Paul warning me about the security. No tool meant I had to rely on being quick and quiet. The man gave me a small map, drawn with shaky lines and notes. When I left the cabin, the night had grown colder. I wasn't sure if it was the air or the weight of what lay ahead. The door I'd come through stood firm behind me, but I didn't look back. The warehouse was exactly where Paul said it would be, an old brick building, windows boarded up, shadows pooling in the corners. I took a deep breath and slipped through a side door Paul had marked, finding myself in a dim corridor lined with rusted pipes and peeling paint. The smell of damp concrete filled the air. I moved carefully, aware of every sound. Somewhere ahead, I heard voices, low and cautious. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. A man's voice. We've got a new one. The broker wants to know if they're worth it. Another voice, colder. Watch the exits. No mistakes. I realized I was close to the control room. Following the sounds, I found a door with a small window. Inside, a bank of monitors showed live feeds from various locations: the gas station, a rundown motel, the woods where I'd found the cabin. The broker's network was real. I spotted the keys I'd seen before, hanging on a board. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I looked for a way to shut it down. There was a panel with switches and wires, complicated but not impossible to understand. I pulled out the flashlight from my pocket and shone it on the labels. Power was the main one. As I reached for the switch, the door behind me creaked open. I spun around and saw two men entering, tense and alert. You shouldn't be here, one said. His eyes were sharp, but he didn't move aggressively. The broker doesn't. I swallowed my panic. I'm here to end this. To stop people from disappearing. The other man laughed quietly. You don't know what you're dealing with. I shook my head. I know enough. Jason got caught in this. I'm not leaving without answers. They exchanged a glance. The first man stepped forward. "You're brave. Or foolish. Either way, you've got one chance. Help us bring the broker down from the inside." I hesitated, then nodded. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the only way. The next few days were a blur. I worked with them, learning the broker's system, gathering information on his network. Paul stayed in contact, keeping me grounded. The men I worked with weren't criminals, just people trapped in the broker's operation, trying to break free from his control. Together, we found Jason. He was alive but exhausted, hidden in a safe house. When I saw him, relief washed over me. Jason explained how the broker used fear and control to keep people from escaping. The keys were just one part of a larger web. With Jason's help, we coordinated a plan to disable the entire network. It took days, cutting off power to the locks, erasing data, dismantling equipment. It was slow and tense, but finally, the keys lost their power. The night I handed the keys over to the authorities, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The gas station was quiet, the restrooms just rooms with regular locks now. No more doors leading to danger. Jason and I stood outside under the fading streetlight. "What now?" he asked. I shrugged. "I'm done running. Maybe it's time to start living." He smiled faintly. "Me too." As I locked the gas station for the final time, I realized the nights wouldn't be lonely anymore. I'd face something dark and come out the other side. The keys were gone, but the memory stayed, a reminder of how fragile safety can be and how far people will go to control it. I walked to my car, feeling the weight lift. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. The sky brightened with the promise of dawn, and with it, a quiet hope settled deep within me. Story 6, Highway Breakdown, Trapped by the Silent Town. I had crossed the same stretch of highway more times than I could count. He nodded and scratched his chin. "This stretch is tricky sometimes. Nothing works right out here. You got a phone?" I held up mine. No signal. He frowned and looked around. "That's not good. Folks don't. Not much to do. You from around here?" "No, just passing through." He shrugged and got back in his truck. "Well, if you want, I can take a look under the hood. Might be something simple." I hesitated. I didn't want to bother him, but I didn't have many options. I nodded. "Thanks. I'd appreciate that." He popped the hood and peered inside. I watched the cables and belts, but I didn't know much about engines. He muttered something about a loose connection, then straightened up. "Looks okay from here. Sometimes these rigs act up when the wiring gets wet or old. You might want to get a mechanic to check it out." I ran my hand through my hair. "Yeah, I will. But I'm stuck here for now." He glanced at the road. "Not many pass this way. You might be waiting a while." I sighed and shut the hood back. "I guess so." He hesitated, then said, "If you want, you can come with me to the store in town. Might be better than waiting out here alone." That gave me pause. I didn't know the guy, but the idea of sitting alone by the side of the road didn't appeal to me. I nodded. "Okay. Thanks." We got in his truck, which rumbled to life without problems. The ride to the town was quiet, with only the hum of the engine and the tires on the pavement. The town itself was small, more of a dot on the map than a place. A few buildings clustered near the highway, a gas station with a closed sign, a convenience store, and a small cafe. He parked in front of the store. "I'll grab some water." "You want anything?" No, thanks. He disappeared inside for a moment, then came back with a bottle of water. Here. It's hot out there. I took it gratefully and drank a few sips. I looked around. The place felt empty. No other customers, no staff in sight. The door to the cafe was shut, and the gas station was dark. Where is everyone? I asked. He shrugged. Most folks work in the fields or the factories outside town. Not much going on early in the morning. I nodded but felt a flicker of unease. Something about the place was off. The silence felt too complete, like the town was holding its breath. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. He caught my gaze and said, "You might want to stay here until your rig gets fixed. The next town's a good hour away, and this road doesn't have much traffic." I forced a smile. Yeah, that's probably best. As he walked back outside, I stayed inside the store, scanning the shelves for anything useful. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I felt the quiet pressing in around me. I glanced out the window and saw him leaning against his truck, looking down the road. Then I noticed something else. Across the street, the houses were empty. No cars parked outside, no signs of life. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. It looked. I asked, "Does anyone live here?" He looked up sharply. "Sure, people do. But they don't come into town much these days. Most have moved closer to the city." I frowned. "So, why is it still on the map?" He shrugged again. "Road maintenance, old businesses hanging on. Some folks." I nodded slowly. The unease didn't go away. Something felt wrong about the whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I checked the time on my phone. Hours until a mechanic might come out. Hours stuck in this silent place where my engine quit and my phone went dead. I swallowed and looked out the window again. The highway lay empty beyond the town, stretching into the distance without a single vehicle in sight. I didn't know it then, but that morning was only the start of something I wasn't ready for. The sun climbed higher, but its warmth did little to ease the chill creeping up my spine. I tried the ignition again, nothing but a stubborn silence. The engine, usually so reliable, was dead. I leaned back against the seat, the leather cool and unforgiving beneath me. Outside, the wind stirred dust across the cracked pavement, and the faint hum of life felt distant, almost imagined. I reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a crumpled map, its folds worn from years of use. Tracing the nearest towns with my finger, I realized just how isolated I truly was. The nearest gas station was miles back the way I came, and the next town up ahead was even farther. With no cell service and a dead phone, hope had begun to feel like a luxury. Minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last. My mind raced, what if no one came? What if I was stranded here until nightfall? Shadows would creep in, and the temperature would drop. Anxiety gnawed at me, growing sharper with every passing moment. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that panic wouldn't fix the car. Instead, I decided to step outside, to stretch my legs and maybe get a clearer view of the surroundings. The air was dry and tasted faintly of dust and gasoline. I scanned the horizon once more, half expecting a stranger to appear, but the road remained empty. The buildings of the town were still mostly shuttered, their faded signs hinting at better days. An old diner sat on the corner, its neon sign flickering weakly as if struggling to stay alive. The silence around me felt unnatural, almost oppressive. I thought about the stories you hear about small towns hiding secrets, about places where time seems to freeze. A sudden rustle from behind one of the nearby bushes made me jump. Heart pounding, I peered closer but saw nothing. Maybe it was just the wind or a stray animal. Still, the sense that I was being watched lingered. I returned to the car, pulling the door shut behind me with a soft click. I sat back down and rested my head on the steering wheel. I had no clue what was coming, but I knew one thing for sure: this was no ordinary breakdown. Something about this place was off, and I was caught in the middle of it. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the empty highway, the unease tightened its grip. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. And whatever was out there, I was part of its waiting game now. I didn't sleep much that night. I spun around. A man stood near the edge of the parking lot, wearing a faded jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His face was hard to read, but there was a tension in his posture, like he was ready to bolt or argue at a moment's notice. "I'm just trying to figure out what's wrong with my truck," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This stretch of road has a bad habit of killing my engine. Twice now." He took a step closer, eyes scanning my rig. "That road's trouble. You don't want to be stuck out there." "Why? What's going on?" I asked, hoping for some straightforward answer. He hesitated, then nodded toward the diner. "People don't stick around here long. You might think it's just quiet, but it's more than that. Folks leave or disappear, and no one asks questions." I frowned. "Disappear?" He swallowed hard. "Yeah. Some just pack up and leave town. Others just vanish. No one knows why or where they go. The highways. Cars break down. People stop and then they're gone before anyone notices." I studied his face, searching for any sign he was joking or exaggerating, but he seemed serious. "Do you know why the engine dies?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nobody's figured it out. Some say it's the road itself. Some say it's people who don't want outsiders finding out what's really going on around here." I glanced back at the diner and then down the road. The highway looked empty, but that silence felt. "Have you seen anyone else stuck out here?" I pressed. "Used to be," he said, voice lowering. "Not anymore. They come once, maybe twice. Then they learn." I nodded slowly, then asked, "What do you mean, learn?" He looked away for a moment, then back at me. "You don't want to be the next one learning the hard way." Before I could ask more, he turned and walked off toward the woods without another word. I watched him disappear among the trees, feeling the weight of his warning settle in my chest. Back at the truck, I closed the hood and sat down behind the wheel. Something about this place was designed to keep people from sticking around. But why? And who was behind it? I decided I needed more information. There had to be someone, anyone, who could explain what was really going on. But the longer I stayed, the clearer it became: asking questions here was dangerous. Not because of what the road could do to my truck, but because of what the people around this place might do to me. I started the engine. It rumbled to life without hesitation. I eased the rig forward, heading back toward the town, hoping to find some sign of life before the engine cut out again. The highway stretched ahead, empty and waiting. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes: a lone figure standing on the side of the road, motionless, watching me. Their face was hidden by the shadow of a hood. I blinked, and they were gone. I didn't wait to see if they'd reappear. I put the truck into gear and drove on, every nerve on edge, knowing this was far from over. The road twisted ahead, flanked by skeletal trees whose bare branches clawed at the overcast sky. The truck's engine sputtered again, a harsh reminder that I wasn't out of trouble yet. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white, as the dim outline of the town slowly emerged through the morning fog. Buildings stood like silent sentinels, deserted, shuttered, their windows like empty eyes staring back at me. I pulled onto the cracked pavement of the main street, scanning for any sign of life. Not a soul stirred. The distant hum of electricity buzzed faintly, but no lights flickered on, no footsteps echoed. It felt like I'd driven into a ghost town, frozen in time. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. The truck coughed once more and stalled just outside an old gas station. I killed the engine and sat still for a moment, listening. Nothing but the wind stirring fallen leaves and the far-off call of a crow. I needed fuel, but the pumps were dry, and the station's windows were smeared with grime. Inside, the shelves were barren, save for a few rusted cans and a cracked, dust-covered radio. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin. The hooded figure's image lingered in my mind, a fleeting shadow that didn't belong. I scanned the cracked sidewalks and the alleyways, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, but I had nowhere to go. The truck was dead, and help was nowhere in sight. Then, from the corner of my eye, movement, a flicker near the edge of the street. I turned sharply, searching for its source. A small dog, scrawny and matted, limped into view. Its eyes were wide, wary, but it didn't run. Instead, it limped toward me, nose twitching, as if deciding whether I was friend or threat. The dog stopped a few feet away, then let out a low, cautious whine. I crouched slowly, extending a hand. The dog hesitated, then shuffled forward, pressing its cold nose to my palm. Relief washed over me in a wave I hadn't realized I needed. Not alone after all. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, my voice rough from disuse. "You don't know how good it is to see you." The dog's tail gave a tentative wag, then it whimpered again, glancing toward the shadows beyond the street. My skin prickled. "Yeah," I said, standing back up. "I saw them too." The presence was close now, something watching, waiting just out of sight. I glanced at the sky, the clouds thickening, the light dimming further. Time wasn't on my side. I slid back into the driver's seat, the dog hopping in after me without hesitation. The engine groaned and coughed one last time before sputtering back to life. I gave one last look at the empty town as the truck rolled forward, headlights cutting through the growing gloom. Somewhere out there, the shadow in the hood was still waiting, and I knew this chase wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as I eased back onto the highway. The dog stood and moved toward the road, pausing to look back at me. I nodded and grabbed my flashlight, following him into the dark. The first steps were cautious. The highway was deserted, the silence heavy. I kept the beam low, scanning for anything unusual. The dog led the way, sticking close to the shoulder. After a few minutes, I spotted a faint light ahead, probably the edge of the town. Relief mixed with anxiety as we approached. The streets were empty. Houses stood dark, windows shuttered. No sign of life. I called out softly, but my voice seemed swallowed by the night. The dog stopped at a corner, ears twitching. I followed his gaze and saw movement, a figure stepping out from a shadowed doorway. I froze. The figure didn't move quickly or make a sound. Just watched. "Hello?" I called again, voice firmer. "I need help." The figure didn't respond, only took a step forward. Then another. I felt the weight of every heartbeat as the distance between us closed. The dog growled low, but didn't move. "Who are you?" I asked. Still no answer. Just more steps. I backed up slowly, feeling the walls of this place closing in. The dog stayed by my side, muscles tense. Suddenly, the figure stopped and raised a hand, pointing down the road. I glanced that way and saw nothing but darkness. The figure spoke then, voice low and calm. "You don't want to go that way." "Then where?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure looked me in the eye for the first time. "You're stuck here until you figure out why." I swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." The figure nodded slowly. "Most don't, at first. But this road, it takes more than your rig. It takes pieces of people who ignore its warning." I glanced back toward the truck. The dog growled louder. "Why me?" I asked. The figure shrugged. "Because you keep coming back." A chill ran through me. The engine dying, the empty town, the vanishing locals, they weren't accidents. I looked down at the dog, who licked my hand once before sitting quietly. "We can't help you if you don't cooperate," the figure said. "But you have to move carefully. Not everyone here wants to be found." I realized then the danger wasn't just mechanical or environmental. It was human. Some of those people who vanished, they weren't gone by chance. "Tell me what to do," I said. The figure's eyes shifted toward the horizon. "First, don't trust the road. Second, don't trust the silence. And third, find the mark. It's the only way out." "Mark?" I repeated. The figure nodded once, then stepped back into the shadows. "You'll see it. When you do, don't ignore it." Then the figure was gone, swallowed by the night. I stood frozen for a moment, the dog at my side. The weight of the warning pressed down on me. No turning back. No simple fixes. I had to find the mark. Whatever it was. The road behind me was dark and empty. The town ahead was quiet and cold. And somewhere in all of it, the reason I was trapped was waiting. I took a deep breath and started walking, the dog at my side, the flashlight cutting a narrow path through the night. There was no choice but forward. The wind whispered through the skeletal trees lining the road, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something darker, something metallic. The dog's ears twitched, its low growl barely audible beneath the rustling leaves. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, its beam flickering as if uncertain whether to illuminate the shadows or be swallowed by them. The town loomed ahead like a forgotten relic, its buildings hollow shells crowned with peeling paint and shattered windows. Streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the edge of vision. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from the darkness, but the dog's steady presence was a tether to reality, a reminder that I was still anchored in this world, at least for now. I moved cautiously, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, each step a defiant punctuation in the heavy silence. The houses were empty, their doors hanging ajar as if inviting me inside, daring me to uncover their secrets. But I resisted. The trail I followed was not one of comfort or familiarity. It was etched in whispers, a cryptic map written in fleeting clues and half-forgotten memories. At the edge of the square, a faint glow caught my eye. A single window glimmered with pale light, a fragile beacon in the encompassing gloom. I approached, the dog stepping closer, its hackles raised. The window was cracked, the glass marred with dirt and time, but through the grime, I could make out a figure hunched over a cluttered table. Papers, maps, and strange symbols cluttered the surface, illuminated by the wavering glow of a candle. The figure looked up as I drew near, eyes sharp and wary. "You're far from home," the voice was gravelly but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had been waiting. "I'm looking for the mark," I said, my voice steady despite the racing pulse beneath my ribs. The figure nodded slowly. "Many come searching for it. Few find what they expect." The dog growled softly, sensing the tension in the room. "Who are you?" I pressed. Call me a keeper of truths, the figure replied, sliding a worn leather-bound journal toward me. This holds the stories you need. But be warned, the mark is not just a place or an object. It's a reckoning. I hesitated before opening the journal, the pages crackling under my fingers. Symbols and notes sprawled across the paper, a chaotic blend of history and warning. The dog whined low, pressing its head against my leg as if urging caution. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the panes and carrying with it a faint, haunting melody, a song of loss and longing that seemed to seep from the very bones of the town. I swallowed hard and looked back at the keeper. Where do I begin? The keeper's eyes glinted in the candlelight. Where the past bleeds into the present. Where the forgotten are remembered. Where the mark waits. I sat back down, the journal heavy on my lap. The keeper's eyes didn't leave me, steady and unreadable. Outside, the wind's faint tune settled into the quiet of the room, but my mind was anything but calm. The pages had so much. But I needed something concrete, a way to stop my rig from dying, to break the cycle that left me stranded on that stretch of highway. Where do I even start with this? I asked, flipping through the journal carefully. The writing was cramped, almost frantic, and the symbols looked like someone had scribbled them in moments of panic. The keeper shrugged. Start where the entries become frequent. That's where the trouble began. I nodded and settled in, reading aloud the first dated entry I could find. July 12, 1978. The highway's been quiet for weeks. No traffic, no sign of anyone passing through. The engine stalls again, third time this month. I'm beginning to think the locals have a reason to avoid this place. I looked up. They're talking about the same stretch? Exactly the same, the keeper said. It wasn't always this way. Before, people used that road without issue. But something changed, and they stopped coming. The dog shifted beside me, restless. I could tell it was picking up on the tension, too. I read the next passage. July 19th, 1978. Something's off. I met a man near the diner on the edge of town. He warned me to turn back. Said the road takes what it wants. I laughed it off then, but now I'm not so sure. The keeper's voice was low. The locals don't talk about it openly. They disappear when outsiders ask too many questions. I closed the journal and stared at the keeper. Disappear? Like they leave town? Or something else? He tapped the book lightly. More. No one finds them. Not the police, not family. It's... My hands clenched. I had to get out of there, but the rig was already a problem. I needed answers now. Have you ever tried to fix the rig? I asked. Several. It runs fine until it hits that one stretch. Then it dies. No one's been able to figure out why. I rubbed my temples. So, what do I do? Keep driving it until it kills me? The keeper shook his head. No. You have to face what the road wants. The mark isn't just a spot on the map. It's a test. I stared at the dog, which suddenly stood, its hackles raised. It crawled low, and the keeper's eyes followed the dog's gaze toward the window. A shadow moved across the empty street outside, quick and deliberate. The keeper froze. Who's there? I asked, standing up. The dog barked sharply, then fell silent. The keeper whispered, "No one should be out there this late." I edged toward the window, heart tight. The shadow was gone. "We're not alone," I said, my voice steady but low. The keeper nodded slowly. "You'll need to see it for yourself." I grabbed the journal, my pulse picking up. It was time to face the problem head on. We stepped outside. The air was colder than I expected for this time of year, sharp and biting. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, uncertain shadows. "Show me," I said. The keeper led me down the cracked sidewalk toward the highway, the dog a few steps ahead, alert. The road stretched out before us, empty and silent. I could hear only the crunch of gravel beneath our feet. "This is the spot," the keeper said, pointing to a curve where the pavement cracked and buckled. "It's where the engine dies every time." I looked at the cracked asphalt, then back at the keeper. "Why here?" He shrugged. "No one knows. But the locals believe the road chooses who it lets pass." I swallowed hard, looking down the empty highway. The silence was oppressive, but I forced myself to move closer. Suddenly, the dog growled again, low and warning. I turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the road, barely visible in the dim light. The figure didn't move or speak, just watched. "Who's that?" I asked, heart rising. The keeper squinted. "Someone who shouldn't be here." I took a step forward. The figure didn't respond. My rig was down the road a bit, parked and silent. The engine was dead, just. I felt the weight of the moment. This was it, the confrontation I'd been avoiding. "Why do you keep coming back?" the keeper asked quietly. I hesitated. "Because I don't understand. Because every time I'm stranded, help never comes. I still can't explain it. Because people disappear, and no one talks about it." The keeper nodded slowly. "Then you'll have to face the road's choice. Either it lets you through, or it takes something in return." I looked at the figure again. It hadn't moved. The dog growled louder, then suddenly bolted toward the figure. I ran after him, shouting, but the figure stepped back into the shadows and vanished. The dog stopped at an empty spot, sniffing the air. I was alone again. I turned to the keeper, who looked as grim as I felt. "We can't wait for the rig to fail again," I said. "We need a plan." He nodded. "Tomorrow, we'll check the journal for any clues about breaking the cycle. Tonight, be ready. The road will test you." I swallowed my fear and looked back at the highway. The figure might be gone, but I knew it wasn't the end. The rig's engine was silent, the night pressing in around us. I felt the first real threat, not from the dark, but from what the road demanded. I didn't know if I was ready, but there was no turning back. The night stretched on, the silence around the rig thick enough to weigh me down. Then why keep coming back? I asked. Why stay here if there's no way out? He shrugged. Because someone has to. Someone has to remember, or it'll all get lost. You're the first in a long time willing to face it. I didn't know if that was meant to comfort me or make me feel more alone. When dawn finally came, the dog was the first to stir. I felt the weight of the coming day settle on my shoulders. The keeper was already up, brewing coffee with slow, deliberate movements. I wasn't hungry, but I accepted a cup, holding it tightly. "We'll try again," he said quietly. "You said the rig stalled last time near the old mile marker. That's where the road chooses." I nodded. "If it stops again, what then?" He looked me in the eye. "Then you face it." The phrase stuck with me as we made our way outside. The air was sharp but clear. The highway stretched out, empty and still. I climbed into the driver's seat, the rig's engine coughing to life on the first try. The keeper and the dog followed on foot, keeping pace beside the cab. As we neared the mile marker, I slowed, gripping the wheel tighter. The rig sputtered once, then died completely. The lights dimmed and cut out. The radio went silent. The familiar chill crept in along the windows. I shut the engine off and looked behind me. The keeper was already there, walking toward the edge of the road. The dog stayed close, alert and quiet. "We're here," the keeper said. "Now it's your choice." "Choice?" I asked. "I don't see any options." "There's always a choice," he said. "You can stay trapped in the cycle, or you can step off the road and walk away from it." I stared down the empty highway, the feeling of being watched creeping back. The figure from the night before didn't appear this time, but the silence felt heavier. I could almost hear the road waiting for me to decide. "Walk away?" I repeated. "If I leave the rig here, how do I get back?" "You don't," he said. "You start over somewhere else. That's the price. But at least you're free." The dog barked softly and nudged my hand. I looked down and saw the keeper already turning away, heading back toward the gas station. I sat in the driver's seat, the rig cold and still. The road stretched out endlessly, empty but full of promise. I could stay and wait for the engine to start again, trapped in the same nightmare, or I could leave it all behind. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The air outside was crisp. I locked the rig and followed the keeper, the dog leading the way. We walked toward the gas station, the highway fading behind us. I looked back once, the rig sitting silent at the mile marker. The road was quiet, but I felt something lift inside me. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The keeper didn't say much as we walked. The dog stayed close, occasionally glancing over its shoulder. When we reached the gas station, he handed me the journal. "Keep this," he said. "Remember what you've learned. Don't let the road take you again." I nodded, clutching the book to my chest. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. The day was breaking fully now. I looked out at the highway one last time. It was just a road, nothing more. I'd faced its test and chosen my own path. The rig's engine didn't matter anymore. The silence wasn't as loud. I was free. I stood there a moment longer, the journal's weight grounding me in ways I hadn't expected. The pages felt worn and fragile, like a map of someone else's scars, yet somehow a guidepost for my own. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, and for the first time, the future seemed less like a fog and more like a horizon to aim for. The attendant inside the gas station glanced at me, eyes curious but kind. I nodded in acknowledgement, then stepped back to the roadside. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and gasoline, a strange but comforting reminder of the journey I had just survived. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the tension start to loosen in my shoulders. The road behind me was no longer a chain but a story, one I was finally ready to leave behind. Pulling out the journal, I flipped through the pages, skimming the hastily scrawled entries and the cryptic sketches that had once seemed so ominous. Now, they spoke of endurance, of struggle, but also of resilience. Whoever had penned these words had been trapped in the same loop, haunted by the endless miles and the whispering engines, yet they had found a way out. That realization gave me strength. If they could do it, so could I. I tucked the journal into the backpack slung over my shoulder and took a deep breath. I had laid the small town marked on the map back in the truck's glove compartment, a place I hadn't dared to think about until now. It was time to move forward, not just physically, but in every sense. The horizon wasn't just a line where earth met sky, it was a promise of something new. As I stepped off the gas station's worn concrete and onto the cracked shoulder of the highway, a car approached in the distance. Its headlights glinted, growing larger as it neared. I hesitated, then raised a hand in greeting. The car slowed, then pulled over a few yards ahead. A middle-aged woman rolled down her window, her face open and friendly. "Need a ride?" she asked. For a moment I hesitated, old fears tugging at me, the ghosts of the road whispering cautions I once heeded. But I shook my head firmly. "No, thank you. I'm heading into town on foot. I need the time to think." She nodded in understanding. "Well, be careful out there. It's easy to lose yourself if you're not paying attention." "I will," I promised, gripping the journal tighter. She smiled, then pulled away, leaving me alone with the road stretching out before me. The rhythm of my footsteps was steady, purposeful. The sun was fully up now, warm and bright, casting light into the corners of my mind that had been dark for too long. With every step, I felt the chains fall further behind me. The road was still there, endless and indifferent, but it no longer held sway over me. I was the one who chose the path now, and that made all the difference.